Good evening and welcome to the March 27th joint meeting of the Board of Selectmen and the Finance Committee. Join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, please.
United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
This meeting is being broadcast by our friends at ECAT. So if you have something you want to say, raise your hand so I can recognize you, and then come to the podium and state your name and your address. First matter of business is Southeastern Regional School.
Do they need to call their meeting to order as well?
It's a joint meeting, so
It's a joint meeting.
it's a joint
You
meeting.
called a joint meeting?
Yes, I did.
You're fine.
Thanks. Southeastern Regional School.
Good evening. I'm Lou Lopes, the superintendent, and with me is Mike Petrowski from Easton. He's the representative from Easton that sits on our 10-member school committee. So tonight, what I thought I'd do is present the Southeastern budget and focus mostly on the assessment and the effect in the Easton portion of it. But the first page, hopefully everyone received a copy of the budget. So the first page is a summary of the school district. Our total budget of FY20, $28,589,574 represents a 4.7% increase over the current year. We continue to operate at net school spending minimum, or Chapter 70. That is to say that our budget is based on the minimum required spending by the state. So the way we set our budget typically is when the governor's budget comes out, the $26,661,098, and it breaks up how much state aid we get, and then how much the minimum local assessments are. That's how we set our operating budget. So we basically, for example, in this year, the total budget request exceeded $28 million, and we just trimmed it down through several meetings and so forth till we got to that number. We're actually a little bit above that number right now because we feel that the legislature may increase. There's some talk about increasing, putting some increases in the budget for FY20. So right now we're showing $125,000 out of our excess and deficiency account in anticipation of that increase. If that increase doesn't happen, we can always reduce our budget or take it out of E&D, which has been voted by the school committee. The other part of our budget, the big part of our budget, is transportation of students. As a regional school district, by law, if they live more than 2.5 miles from the school, we have to provide free transportation. The state is supposed to reimburse the towns the cost of transportation according to the law, but it's subject to appropriation, and they have never fulfilled their 100% of their obligation. They've got close, and then they got not so close, and now they're back up, and they're funding about 60 to 70% of it. So the net cost of the transportation is $548,000. That goes to the gets assessed to the towns. And then those other things that some of them are just things that we report. We have to report out at budget time. The school expansion, the $26 million project we completed about 5 years ago. The annual bond on that is $361,725. $169,000 of that comes out of our adult ed receipts. In the local assessment, we've stayed true to our promise that will not increase. So the $192,000 that we assessed the towns in the city of Brockton has not changed in the last 20 years. We also have to report out ESCO payments, which was part of an energy performance savings project that we did about 8 or 9 years ago. And after the first 3 years, that falls outside the operating budget. The good news is payments under Chapter 40, Section 13D. Those are future liabilities for sick day buyback or unused vacation time upon retirement. As of this year, that account is fully funded, so there is no assessment to the towns for that. So we have that reserve account fully funded, which is great. News, we're also for the first time starting to fund our OPEB reserve. It's a very modest amount. We're taking $50,000 out of E&D. So we're not asking the towns or the city for any money. We're going to start to fund it, mostly to number one, it's an obligation, but number two, it'll help our bond rating. So I'm sure you're familiar with that. So that's our overall budget. I'll jump to the second page, unless people have questions on that, but then I'll focus in on mostly Easton. Our total enrollment, 1,531 students, is up 22 from the previous year. Easton is up 1 student from 84 to 85, so it's almost the same. Easton makes up 5.6% of the population of the school district. So the next page is kind of where the assessment is, and I'll just jump right to kind of the bottom. Breaks down each portion, but for Easton, for FY20, the assessment amount that is being asked is $1,179,066, which is an increase of $46,358. And I can kind of get into what that is. So if you go 2 pages next to that, which is the one that kind of looks like this, if everyone sees that. The thing that sometimes people get confused about or question, and we've been showing this to towns, and I think some of the communities like it because they can kind of see what they are to similar communities, is the amount of money we get per child doesn't change, whether they come from Brockton or they go to Easton or Foxborough or Sharon, come from either one of those. What changes is who we get the money from. So for example, for Brockton, we get $13,946 per student as state aid, and Brockton pays $3,479 in operating. And in Easton, it's reversed, right? Easton only gets $4,238 in state aid, and its net school spending obligation is $13,187. And I've talked about this, and the rest of these pages talk a little bit about it, but it's based on the aggregate wealth model or the community's ability to pay. And so what happens is the higher the property values, they add up your property values, they add up your income, and you see in those sheets. And it says you should be able to afford X amount of dollars. In Easton's case, based on your tax base, the state comes up with a number saying that you should be able to generate just under $30 million for education spending. And then it looks at how many students you have and what it's going to cost to educate those students. And then the state gives you the balance. So it's a formula that changed in '93 and again in 2001 based on a lawsuit that Massachusetts lost, a federal lawsuit that caused them to change to this model. So that's kind of the long and short of it. There's a one-page summary for the town of Easton where you can see the trend of enrollment and assessment over the last 5 or 6 years. And then there's a chart that kind of, these are factors that affect the assessment. The biggest one is and it's the good news, is the municipal revenue growth in Easton over the past year was 4.43, which is higher than the state average. So obviously, that means property values have gone up, which is great if you own property in Easton and so forth. But under the formula, the state says, great, they have more money, so we're going to give you less. So what that means is for Southeastern, the per pupil costs for next year are going up $387. So if you take that $387 real quickly and multiply that times the 85 students, you're going to get $32,895 of increased assessment. So it's pretty close. You take that $32,000 plus the 1 student, you're going to get to, that's how that equates to that 40,000 or so increase in assessment. And you could actually do that using the chart below that for the town of Easton. There's 3,559 students that attend the Easton Public Schools. The per pupil costs are going up $552. So if you add that up, and I'm sure you've probably have done this already, the additional amount of money for the Easton Public Schools is probably going to be close to $2 million that the state is going to be asking you to fund, 1.9654 based on that formula. So again, so that's kind of our budget. Why don't I stop there? I can talk about, you know, any of the numbers. I can also talk about the school and some of our initiatives or anything else that people would like me to talk about. I know you have a busy agenda, so.
Mr. Lopes, I just have a quick question. I appreciate it. Thank you for that, setting the stage. In a quick synopsis, what drives the fundamental difference between the spend per pupil of $13,871 projected in '20 for the Southeastern student versus $10,962 that we allocate towards a person who attends the Easton schools? Is there a
Yes.
formula that drives that, or could you help me understand the differences between that?
So if you go to there's a page that has a foundation budget page, and what happens is there's a different number that gets added to
I'm just gonna get there
whether a
if I could.
student is a kindergarten student or a first grader. It's really fine print, I'm sorry.
That's
Yeah,
okay.
there you go. And so there's a factor that gets added based on, so for example, high school students are the most expensive to educate. So it's a higher number, the costs are higher. So when you're averaging, you know, 3,000, whatever the number of students are, 3,559 students, that included in that average is also preschool kids, half-day you have 205 half-day kindergarten students, you have 33 full-day kindergarten students.
I understand. What would be the equivalent of high school versus high school?
So I'd have to calculate that. You know, I guess we could probably take, so the thing with the high school is you would have to take that 1,189 high schoolers, which is $11 million, and then you would have to add the English, you have 17 English language learners in high school, which is $55,000. And then there's a special ed number, which doesn't break out by high schools. You'd have to ask, you know, $3,613. So I wouldn't know how many of those are high school kids. You know, I mean, I'm sure that the school department would know that. So you would add those numbers, and you could come with a per pupil rate for high school, middle school, elementary,
Got it.
you know.
In your estimation, would they be close
Um,
and or an equivalent?
It depends. It depends on the districts. In fact, one of our districts, it's actually cheaper for them to go to Southeastern than for them to go to high school. But they're so far above net school spending.
Is
You know,
that
so-
Easton?
Huh?
Is that Easton? You said one of the districts.
No, Sharon, I think
Sharon.
is, yeah, Sharon
Okay.
is, I think. So Easton is, so this is this chart here, which is above net school spending. If you look at Sharon's, it's like way up the chart. It's really high. They actually, you know, so where we're at the bottom there, you know, so it's typically about $3,000 higher for vocational education per student. But that depends, because that's based on just the minimum. So if you give the school system more than a minimum, then that 3,000 delta just drops down, right? And
Understood.
actually could go the other way.
Perhaps we can circle back and we can connect with our school system in coordination with you. It might just be a helpful barometer just to understand the per pupil spend and try to understand
Yeah.
the differences
So-
and needs of each.
The biggest thing to remember, if you're looking at per pupil expenses, and you want to, and it's counterintuitive under the formula, if you want to reduce your per pupil costs, have more kids, okay? Your per pupil costs in Easton are going up this year because there's a decrease of 61 kids, right?
In our town, not
in your
your-
town.
not in South.
In your town,
Understood.
right? So in other words, if let's say next year, the number of students from Easton went down 10,
Mhm.
the per pupil cost would actually go up.
Understood, because you're spreading a fixed cost
It's,
over.
yeah,
Understood.
and that's,
But
so,
I think we could normalize for that.
You
if we
could,
looked
you
at
could.
Trends and periods of time, just to get an estimation.
yeah, and that's why we
Helpful.
provide analysis over several years, so you could start looking at that. And I could go back further than that if you really wanted to.
I appreciate that. And at the heart of the question, I apologize for not probably clarifying. At the heart of the question is we are tasked with trying to understand efficiencies, making sure we're trying to get all of the value that we possibly can, and I am sure you and the team are also doing the same as well. And it just helps us have a barometer to
Yeah.
understand or assess how that
Correct.
might be occurring at the school.
One of the things that we decided as the insurance, our insurance is actually a 0% increase, which is one way we're able to balance the budget.
It's huge.
We actually could have done a 5% decrease, but we decided to self-fund next year, and we're going to use that cushion to build up the healthcare reserve fund, so that we can ride out, if we do have that hiccup year, is build that up. So we've had two kind of surplus years that we're able to maintain that, so.
What's the value of that 5%?
200, 200 and something thousand dollars, yeah,
Sure.
Could I ask, I'm just curious, where, do you get insurance through GIC?
no, no. We're on our own. We use a consulting group, Marsh McLennan MMA, and we've been using them for, we departed from Gateway about 4 or 5 years ago, because we found that we were actually subsidizing some other high-cost districts, and it's actually worked for us.
I have a question, just one of the terms that was used, because I'm not an education professional, municipal revenue growth factor.
Mhm.
That is separate than municipal revenue growth, yes?
Yes. It's based on your cherry sheet, so I don't know if it is or isn't.
Okay, well, so in this example, if that's one of the things that gets used by the state in the Chapter 70 formula.
Right. This page here
Okay.
shows you
And
municipal
so
revenue.
I just want to clarify for anyone at home that you see 4.43 for a municipal growth revenue factor. Our actual total municipal growth for revenue last year was less than 1%.
Yeah.
So that's not anything to do with Southeastern region.
Right,
I just wanna
right. So it's
clarify
right
that
off your cherry sheet,
That growth
yeah.
factor is
Yeah,
not one
yeah,
for one with the
yeah.
actual growth in revenue that we see.
Yeah, but, so here's the interesting thing, and I go to a lot of towns, and that question comes up a lot.
Sure.
And I work with Department of Revenue and Department of Education. They assume, they see that number, they know you can levy up to 2.5%. And to stay up, you have to come up with that other piece of revenue, either through additional tax. So there are communities that do look at that and say, we're above 2.5, so we gotta do a additional ask for 1.9% in our budget, or we're gonna be tackling into our reserves. Because the state assumes that the state is gonna escalate it by that percentage, give you that much less aid. Because the state, the only thing you're getting from the state, unfortunately, and don't, it's not me. They're only giving you $20 per student, $71,000 in additional aid.
Well, right, so to make sure I understand, so this is a growth factor that's an assumption of the basic municipal ability to pay, is that fair?
It's based on your property values
Right.
and your income, basically the people that live.
Sort of a wealth profile,
Ex-
right?
right.
So you're looking at, not you again, but I think it's a good discussion for the group. You're 4.43, so that's the assumption of what could be growing.
Correct.
Right? And what we're actually seeing is sometimes 1%. And somewhat paradoxically, the second largest source of revenue, including the state, goes up by Chapter 70.7, right? So the idea is that the delta there would be made up through just the town, just increased taxes.
Right. And so the other thing to remember is when you hear the governor legislation, and and I don't want this to be a political conversation, but if they say we put an extra $1 million into education, understand that in Easton's landscape, Easton's paying 75% of that $1 million, right? So I mean, obviously $1 million, if it's across the whole state, whatever portion of that Easton is, you're paying 75 cents on that because you're only getting reimbursed 25% of the education budget, right? And the state saying, oh, they can afford the other 75%. So sometimes people say, well, that's great, we're getting more money, but they don't realize that their assessments are going to go up as well. So that's a separate argument that sometimes people need to have with their reps and senators, saying, wait a minute, you understand, it's great that you put more money for health insurance in the budget, and now you're not funding English language learners in the education budget, but you're funding it on our backs, you know, and we're struggling to balance our own town budget, so.
What does NSS mean?
Net school spending requirement, yeah. It's the minimum amount by law so if we don't meet, so as a school district, if I don't meet net school spending requirements, it gets added to my next year's budget. And I get slapped, you know, saying, you didn't spend enough money. If the town doesn't meet their minimum contribution, for 3 years in a row, the state can step in, and they've done it in certain towns, and stop you from adjusting your tax levy limit, and saying you can't go up on taxes until you pay the schools what they're supposed to get. And I'm not sure if it's the same for fire and police. I'm not sure about that, but that's how that works.
Does anybody from the Finance Committee have any questions for Dr. Lopes? Okay, thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
Michael,
both.
thank you.
So,
Next on our agenda is Department of Public Works, Trash and Sewer.
so if I could, while Dave and Jack are setting up, I just wanted to point out, I don't know if I did this Monday night, but budget books that we all have in front of us are actually a little ahead of schedule this year. We have the narratives for all the town departments in there that have some new information that's helpful, looking 5-year look forward and back on staff levels and things like that, because we're working towards the Government Finance Officers Association Distinguished Budget Award, so we added more information to this and put it in early, so there's helpful narrative information in there. Another thing that you'll hear from a couple of the departments tonight, as part of this budget process, I did ask for larger town departments, police, fire, public works, not necessarily through their requested budgets and SoftWrite, which is the software we use that shows the requests, but to qualify and quantify what their ongoing unmet needs are. We heard from the schools Monday night the challenges that they're facing because we're continuing to grapple with a structural revenue deficit, which we have been for many, many, many years. Our larger departments have other needs as well that many times don't even make it through that first cut administratively to make it to these joint hearings to discuss. So I did ask, even for those items that are not being requested in light of the revenue shortfall, that these departments do touch on some of those needs and what that means for the town. So you'll hear about a bit from some of the departments tonight.
All right, thank you. I'm Dave Field, Director of Public Works. With me is Jack Marsh, Operations Manager. Going to go over the brief overview of DPW, talk about our 2020 budget, and just discuss some budget challenges. DPW has 36 full-time equivalent employees over 4 divisions. We maintain 117 miles of roads, street signs, crosswalks, line striping. We supply 704 million gallons of water in calendar year 2018 to 7,500 services. We handle snow and ice. One of the more notable things we do, we take care of 17 million square feet of pavement. We maintain 767,000 square feet of building space. That includes school and town buildings. In 2018, we completed 1,568 building-related work orders. We take care of all the grounds in town, school and town, 42 acres of sports fields, 22 separate fields, 9 playgrounds, the high school turf field, which surprisingly needs a lot of maintenance. You have to keep that infill groomed properly, 29 cemeteries, and thousands of man-hours doing that. Last year, we did 3,000 man-hours of tree work. You might recall, this time last year, we were busy recovering from those nor'easters. We're still recovering from them a little bit. We maintain 129 town vehicles. We handle the Geographic Information System, or GIS, for the entire town, including assessors. It's really the base map of all of our data collection and how we track everything. We handle the operation and maintenance of the sewer systems in Northeastern Village and soon to be in Queesit and Five Corners. We take care of stormwater throughout town. We have 362,000 linear feet of drains. We also handle the stormwater compliance with our stormwater phase 2 permit, which requires, among other things, cleaning all catch basins yearly and street sweeping. We take care of solid waste for the town. We currently have just under 4,100 subscribers. We also have a new item coming up, curbside textile recycling, which you'll see some notices on going out soon. It's going to start April 1st. It's another service we're going to provide. But this is one of those tasks that take up a ton of administrative time at the DPW, both for our administrative assistant and for our sign tech, who actually does all the barrel recoveries and fixes of all the barrels. We own our own recycling barrels, so we're responsible to maintain those, and they like to break a lot. We own our own streetlights. We own 1,467 of them. We've previously bought them at a tremendous savings and converted them all to LED, and now we maintain them. Last year, we maintained 54 lights. We handle engineering and project management, subdivision site plan reviews. We issue trench permits, street opening permits, sewer permits. We do in-house design, permitting and layout. And we manage capital projects. Over the last 3 years, there's been $29 million worth of capital projects that the DPW is responsible for. That includes Queesit, Five Corners, various roadway construction projects, Union Street, Depot Street, Elm Street, and South Street Culvert. Not all those are locally funded by the town. Some are involve state grants or state funding, but it's ultimately our projects which we design and have to administer. And then we operate the landfill, the gas collection and flare system, the air, ground, water, and surface water monitoring. We administer many grants, including green communities. Requires annual reporting. We apply for and receive competitive grants, which also require reporting. We're on our second application for the small bridge program, which will hopefully get another $500,000 for another bridge in town. We handle the bridge and culvert inspections, traffic safety issues, and then health and safety, which has become a bigger and bigger ask for our whole department. A lot of training is necessary for all our guys, both in their licenses and then just general safety and environmental health and safety compliance throughout all facilities. Then there's the other stuff we do. So any other project that goes in, we usually have to touch it somehow, whether it's voting or graduation setup for schools. DPW is usually involved. And probably one of our most important roles is emergency response. We are a first responder. We are the point on snowstorms and windstorms, but we also support police and fire on other activities and other disasters where we provide support, traffic, and other support as needed. So with that, I'll get into the 2020 budget. If you have any questions, please stop me anytime. The narrative for DPW starts on page 59, I believe, in your package. This is all of the operating and enterprise accounts that the DPW handles, and I'll go through each one of these one by one. So DPW administration, which is on page 61, minor increase in payroll from contractual increases, no increase in expenses. On buildings and grounds, again, contractual increases for payroll. There's a $10,000 proposed increase for building maintenance, just to reflect what we actually spend per year on building maintenance, or closer reflect what we spend on building maintenance. And the other major change is we're transferring out the funds for Frothingham Hall, which were previously in the buildings and grounds budget, and that's being transferred to Health and Community Services. On the highway side, again, minor increase in payroll, and we're proposing a $10,000 addition to vehicle maintenance, and I'll explain that a little further later on, just to, again, come closer to what we actually spend on vehicle maintenance per year. Snow and ice, we're proposing no changes at this time. Just to give you a snapshot of where we've been for the last 5 years and where we are currently this year. Overall, we've been spending $659,000 a year. This year, it's projected to be $516,000, but I'm hopefully that'll be under $500,000. That's just a projection based on where we were at spending as of Monday. But I tried to account for most of the expenses for the remainder of the year. We have some invoices coming through for previous repairs of equipment and things like that, but we're pretty close, so I'm comfortable we'll have a sizable give back on the proposed deficit. One item we did implement this year was salt brine. It allowed us to spread salt more efficiently and at a savings. So it took about a third less salt, a third of the salt that we normally put on for a granular salt application, we're able to do with salt brine. So it did save us some money. We did 9 applications this year. Jack, want to talk about water enterprise?
Absolutely. Water enterprise is a big portion of the budget. This year's $2.590 million. Overall budget is up 10%. Majority of that is in payroll for a couple of different reasons. We are proposing to bring in a transition employee for my position, which I'll be retiring at the end of this budget cycle. The new operations manager is gonna need a little bit of time, wherever we get, to try to cram in everything we have. When I took over, I had Wayne Southworth as DPW director, who ran the department forever, so the new guy's gonna need a crutch and need a little bit of training to get to know the system, to keep everything in compliance with DEP regulations, and just to get to know everything. So we're looking at bringing someone in beginning of the season, beginning of the year, and that'll be going out by the end of the year. Also, there's other sick leave incentives. The other employee, Shirley Tufts, that's retiring, she is a 35-year employee, so she still has some grandfather things in for some buyback. So that's a one-time cost on the payroll. The expense part of the budget is pretty much level funded at a % increase. And then the debt service that we don't control is going up. That's due to the new pump stations and everything. We just built a replacement well. It's going online next week.
Any questions on water enterprise?
Or just a quick.
Sure.
So all of these funds, this is out of a water enterprise account, which is not funded out of general.
Correct.
And Jack, how many, you said 35 years for Shirley, how many years?
I'm in my 39th now, it'll be 40 and a half years.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
And Jack can probably give you the amount of days he has left. He's been on that countdown for a while. Trying to keep him, but he's set on going, so.
I was counting, it'd be 449. It's been a great town to work for, honestly, God. I worked with a lot of different people, and town of Easton's been good to us, definitely good to the water, and it's been easy because I've been enterprise, so. When times get tough, it still makes my budgets easier than everybody else's. Still have to work at it. And we do a good job. We haven't had a rate increase, and the last one was 2011, and we're working hard trying to maintain everything.
And one of the reasons why
Celebrated
it's,
department as well.
yeah, one of the reasons why it's easy to get funding is because it's an excellent department, excellent division of the DPW, and they do it the right way, so people don't blink when there's requests, because they know it's gonna be done appropriately. So that's a credit to Jack and Wayne Southworth previously. Our other solid waste recycling enterprise account, minor increase of $18,000, and that's really to reflect more users and then slightly higher cost in recycling. Recently renegotiated that contract. As you may know, there's been some issues in the global recycling market that have caused the processing fees of recycling to go up. Hopefully, the commodity value will follow sooner than later, and those costs, those net costs to Easton will come down, but moderate increase here of $18,000 proposed.
Chuck, did you have a?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions, Mr. Field. Does the building and grounds handle the schools as well?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
Yep.
I just didn't know if it was.
So we handle the maintenance, so we don't clean the building. Schools are obviously self-sufficient, they have their own staff, but we handle all the maintenance, so we have a craftsman, we got a carpenter, HVAC tech, a plumber, and then a general buildings ground supervisor. So we handle all the general maintenance that goes on in those buildings, as well as town buildings.
The other one, smaller in stature and in number of dollars, is meals allowance. And why is there meals allowance at all? Is this for when the DPW has an overnight shift as a result of an emergency, or?
So a meal allowance was a contractual item, so when a person worked for 6 hours continuously, they got a meal allowance. We've actually eliminated that in our last contract renegotiation, that's gone away. So meal allowance is still a line item in the budget, but you can see it's been zeroed out everywhere.
Okay.
So there's no more meal allowance.
Thank you.
David, can you talk a little bit more about the recycling issue? Because that's
Sure.
something I don't know that a lot of people are aware of in terms of the contamination, et cetera.
Yeah, so the China sword policy from China really cut the contamination, acceptable contamination in their commodities to almost zero, making it almost impossible for anyone in the United States to ship that material to China. So as a result, the waste haulers, like in our case, Waste Management, who handles our recycling, they really had to clamp down on contamination rates. So we previously had no contamination rate in our contract, and nor did many other communities, or most communities have that. Because of this, the new global reality of recycling, we do now have a 10% contamination threshold. So anything over 10% contamination by weight in the recycling, we'll have to pay a penalty on. So we've had an audit done. We found out we're at 13% right now. So that's not bad. There's other communities in the 20s and 30s. So overall, we're doing good. We're hoping public education can get us down under that 10%. But we've conservatively budgeted for that contamination rate. If we stayed at 13%, we'd still be able to handle it within our budget. But we're hopeful that we'll get down below that. The contamination rate doesn't actually, the penalties don't start until next year. But it's just a new reality of recycling.
And Dave, for
Sure.
folks who might not be as familiar, contamination rate, it relates to, so when we put stuff into recycling bin,
Yeah, so.
if I take a plastic bag and fill it with 20 bottles and tie it, that counts, correct?
Yeah, so
contamination means
unfortunately,
anything that gets pulled out.
anything that should not be in the recycling is contamination, even if it's a garbage bag that's full of recycling, that just has to come out of the waste stream, and that's all considered contamination. There's multiple things that people put in there, wish recycling they call it, like they want it to be recyclable, but it really isn't, including bowling balls. A surprising number of bowling balls get processed every day at Waste Management.
And clothing, right?
Clothing,
Which is why
yes.
we now have the
Yes.
textile recycling to help people divert that.
Yeah, so we are implementing a curbside textile recycling. There's mailers going out. Every customer should be receiving a mailer and 2 bags, 2 pink bags. They'll be able to put that curbside. It's not to compete with donation bins. But will divert tonnage that would normally cost us in the $75 to $80 a ton range. So it's a win-win for everyone.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Sewer enterprise, another enterprise account we have. No change proposed at this time, but this handles the user fees and the cost to operate our wastewater treatment plant at Northeastern Village and our pump stations that'll be coming online at Queesit and Five Corners. So that's all of our budget line items. I just want to discuss briefly some of the considerations we have. DPW continues to work with fewer bodies than recommended, and I'll go explain these in a little bit. We're not asking for any additional positions at this time. We understand the realities of this year's budget and the previous budgets. We do need additional funding going forward to adequately maintain our assets, including building, roads, and fleet. And deferring replacement of equipment and maintenance of assets is costing us money, and it's something that we really have to take a hard look at going forward. So just a couple staffing metrics. So for the building space we have, the 767,000 square feet, we should have 16 full-time equivalent maintenance professionals. We have 4. On vehicle maintenance, for 129 vehicles, we should have 6.5 mechanics. We have 2. Highway was identified as the lowest staffed, in the operational audit, other than one community, and I think they've since hired, so we should be the lowest. And DPW was also administration was also identified as the lowest staffed. We definitely, sorry, was there a question?
Yeah, I was just gonna
Sure.
ask you, what are the benchmarks for that kind of?
So
standard?
there's a few different ones. The building maintenance comes out of International Facilities Management Association and GSA. And the vehicles come from APWA and ASCE metrics on, proper fleet operations.
Is it a national standard?
Yes, yeah.
And APWA is the American Public Works Association.
Yes, yeah, I'm sorry. And these are kind of open metrics that you can get in any report that they're commonly referred to. So our main staffing needs, which again, we're not asking for, but we do need a plumber. And again, this is more for the general maintenance aspect of it. It's to get a fifth body out of the 16 that we don't have. And it would help us it would stop us from going outside for plumbing-related items on the 875 fixtures we have throughout town. We definitely need another mechanic to help us get us closer to that 6.5 needed. And we need another civil engineer. I'm an engineer, the town engineer technically. We have an assistant town engineer. We're both licensed professional engineers. But again, with $29 million worth of capital over the last 3 years, that's an awful lot of projects to administer responsibly for really two people. And my job precludes me from being directly involved in 24/7. So those are our biggest concerns staffing-wise.
David, I apologize, on
Sure.
that last slide, are any of those staffing levels enough to offset the expense? For example, using the plumber example, if we had a plumber, and would that expense be offset if we didn't have the outside contracting associated with it?
I believe it would. I've shown this previously for the carpenter and the electrician. I've did some examples. I didn't break it down today, 'cause I'm just talking globally. These are needs. We're not making the request now, but yeah, I believe so. Just as an example, for DPW, we spent $55,000 on a plumber for probably 2 or 3 weeks worth of work when we did our offices over last year.
Wow.
So, I mean, it's a need. It's hard to get the plumbers in. When you send a plumber into the school, we can't just let them loose. We have to have another staff person dedicated to working with them. And again, all the costs that we have with the plumber are just plumbing. We do all the prep work, we find the leak, or whatever the issue is, we identify it, we bring them in, we do all the restoration after the fact. Having a plumber on staff would be able to do that on their own at I think, a significant savings.
Well, and Dave, I think the example we've seen in the past, we use the electrician as an example.
That's
right?
correct.
Even with overtime, a cost of $100,000, if we paid prevailing wage for the amount of hours, it would have been closer to $250,000. Right, so it is more efficient and effective. The challenge, though, and Dave, correct me if I'm wrong, is that what ends up happening is not necessarily that we are spending that 250% premium, it's that the work just doesn't get done.
True.
Right.
There's a
So-
lot of
so we
deferred
have
maintenance.
A tremendous amount of deferred maintenance.
Yeah, and I'll get to that in a couple slides, unfortunately.
Thank you.
As far as our infrastructure goes, we have a lot of needs with our infrastructure as well. And again, I'm not trying to, shock people or be alarmist, but this is something will affect our level of service at some point. So we have the issue with roads. If anyone's seen my pavement management presentation, we need about $1 million locally to supplement our road budget each year, in addition to what we get for Chapter 90. For our buildings, it's recommended in a myriad of publications that we should be spending 2% of the replacement value on maintenance, in preventative maintenance and capital repairs for buildings. Now, I'll get into this one more slide each. And on the DPW fleet, we should be spending at least $600,000 a year to maintain our fleet in its current state, and we're not doing that. So with the pavement management funding, I know it's a little tough to read, but
I'm sorry, Dave, on that
Sure.
last slide, was that, was that current fleet age is over 20 years?
yes,
old?
I'm gonna get to that
I'm sorry,
in
I
another
just want to
slide.
make sure that was.
Yep, no, that's correct. You're seeing that correct.
Okay.
So on pavement management, the blue is what we've done over the last 5 years. We've been averaging just under $1 million a year for pavement funding, which has been great. It's helped us. We've kind of maintained our level of service, but the red line indicates really what we should be spending a year, and it's really closer to $1.5 million. So going forward in 2020, this coming year, We're gonna be spending about $1 million again, because we borrowed last town meeting. We appropriated $500,000 locally, but that's not quite enough. We still need another $600,000 to really hit our target. And then going forward in the next 2 years, we're kind of assuming that we're not gonna be able to get that borrowing authority going forward. And we'll have basically $1.1 to $1.2 million shortfall in our roads. So what that's gonna mean is our roads are gonna go, level service will go down. Anyone knows who lives on any subdivision road in town, most of them are at the end of their useful life. We have a backlog of $18 million. I don't believe we'll be able to touch any of those in the near future at our projected funding levels. And we're trying to stretch the dollars and do as much work as we can and do it in the right spots. And we're using our pavement management to do that. But the reality is, we just don't have enough money to get into those roads. So our level of service will be going down unless there's additional funds put into pavement management, either capital or through our operating budget.
Dave, can I just ask
Sure.
to add a little bit of detail there for folks who might not have been at the pavement management presentation? So the blue bars are what we've actually spent, and that's a combination of local funding that we've,
Correct.
for years now, funded through borrowing in the capital budget as a stopgap to supplement Chapter 90. So Chapter 90 is state roadway funding that municipalities receive, so it's Chapter 70 is for education. We have a variety of different state sources of revenue. Do you remember the last time Chapter 90, with the exception of that 1 year bump, was not level funded?
No, there's been a couple small appropriations that the governor's done a
Yep.
couple times with rapid repair money, and one time it went up to 300 million statewide. But in general, it's been 200 million statewide for, I believe, 8 to 10 years.
Okay.
And construction costs have basically made that a cut of about a half.
Okay.
Because construction costs have gone up significantly over that time.
And so the MMA looked at that recently, and their survey, the Mass Municipal Association survey of road needs in Massachusetts, put that 200 million annual number, the actual need that cities and towns, not just us, need from the state, closer to, I think, 600 plus. They've been asking for 300 to no avail. And so, to be clear, you have those green, with fiscal 20, there's already a borrowing authorization.
Yep.
So what we're looking at in the next 2 years is a significant drop off. So that red line is to maintain service or to slightly improve our road surface rating?
That's to maintain.
That's to maintain.
To maintain with construction cost escalation going forward. And, you know, in fiscal year 21 and 22, we're proposing only using available Chapter 90 money.
Right.
In Chapter 90, we get about $740,000 a year, but we have to utilize that for design as well for our TIP projects, to leverage state and federal money for Depot Street, Union Street, and those larger infrastructure projects which are essential for us. So we really have about $500,000 a year to spend on roads. So which makes up that gap, that delta between the target and what's we estimate is $1.1 to $1.2 million.
And that's indicative of not only the stress we feel from the structural revenue deficit on our operating budget, but the capital budget as well.
Correct.
Thank you.
Question about the delta between essentially the red line and the actual spending or the anticipated funding.
Mhm.
Is that stacking? Like, it doesn't seem like it's stacking to the delta currently, but like if you're not at target funding for maintenance in 2019, is the next target funding for maintenance including that gap that was not spent?
No, but our backlog will grow. So it's not exactly stacked, but it does grow. And you can see that we believe our target should be that 1.5, you know, a little less than 1.5. We've done just about $1 million a year. We've been able to maintain our RSR, which is the road surface rating, went down slightly over that time. But I believe that's kind of skewed because we've been doing our good roads, we're keeping in good shape with lower cost improvements. So our backlog on bad roads, which are more expensive, is growing. So that's why, even though we've only spent $1 million, we're kind of level service funded, but it's really not the case because our side roads have deteriorated and are gonna cost us more money.
And I assume that backlog it's probably not also a one-to-one. There's some considerations and factors on that backlog that are.
Yeah, every
not
year our
1,000
roads
per-
age.
Right.
So, and this is from a mile year analysis. And basically, every year we have 117 miles of road that get older. So we have to add 117 miles of life to the road every year, otherwise our level of service will go down. And certain repairs add more mile years to those roads. So if we repave and reclaim a road, it might give us 20-mile years for that stretch we did, where a crack sealing might give us 2-mile years, and a mill and overlay might give us 8. So all those are factored in. That's how we came up with these numbers to determine what our real need was.
Do you factor inflation into your projections?
It is here in these projections. It's been going up about 4% a year, so that's what that, the uptick from 2019 is. Looking backwards, we didn't do anything with inflation. We just kind of held that just for, informational purposes. So now on this is really the shocking one, the building maintenance spending. So again, the 2% is what they recommend, and there's multiple publications. The latest one I actually saw is at 2 to 4%. Not even getting there yet, but 2% is what we suggest we maintain and put in for your annual spending and your capital spending. So I looked back over the last 7 years to see what we've actually done and combined town and school spending, operating, salaries for maintenance, and capital requests. And this is even MSBA school roof repairs. We've been averaging $1.3 million of spending, which on its face doesn't sound bad, but the recommended spending is $6.8 million. So that we're underfunding by $5.5 million our buildings. And so one example I pulled out, and this is something, we have a work order system that we use to handle all our work orders, our reactive work orders, and then our preventative maintenance work orders. Our preventative system has come online recently in the last couple of years, and since July 1st, I asked my buildings ground supervisor to let me know what we've done for PMs. We call them preventative maintenance work orders. It's generated 9,748 PMs for us. We have been able to complete 255 of those. So 8,783 were deferred straight out because they've come up again, so they've just been deferred, and then we have 710 pending. And that's indicative not that we're not doing PMs or don't want to do PMs, we're putting out fires. So we're really on a reactive mode, and you can ask the schools or any other building, occupant. We have issues that we have to wait till something fails. We try to fix it. We put out the fire. We call them 911s, and we never have time to get our head up and take care of PMs. We'd love to do it. My guys would love nothing more to have the time to maintain all these items. But when you have 4 individuals and a lack of funding, where you should have 16 and another $5.5 million of funding, that's where you get. So I thought that was very indicative of where we stand on our building spending and what's happening to our buildings.
Have you ever made a comparison that to another comparable town? Those figures?
No, but it's tough to, that's hard data to get. I don't think
I don't know
towns.
how you would capture it. But,
Yeah, I mean, it took a lot of digging just to get that for our town. It's tough to ask another town to pull that out, but no, I haven't. We have bigger problems than comparing how bad we are.
But staffing levels, I think, are comparable.
Staffing
and that may
levels,
be
yeah.
an
And
indicator.
from the audits, we were identified as pretty much lowest all around. Not all DPWs maintain buildings, so it's a little harder. You have to look at facilities departments, things like that, but
Yep.
I'm guessing we're probably on the very low end, because like everything in Easton, we run lean.
Yep.
Did you mention what towns we were benchmarked against for the audit?
No, I'm sorry, that was
I can pull
2017,
that
so.
up. It's
yeah,
the same group that we used again in the community comparison report.
So, I've seen it.
Okay, yes.
And to this point, the $5.1 million underfunding for the existing sort of repairs, et cetera, maintenance to the school. I think this brings up a point that we saw last night, obviously in the school, or 2 nights ago, and last night, to be fair.
It's all blending.
Is that, yeah, it's been a long couple days. But to this point, we're underfunding, through no fault of our own, $5.1 million. That is not reimbursable in any way, shape, or form. And we have an option on the table now to potentially take this process and start anew and take the existing buildings that are currently at this level of underfunding and repurpose potentially and rework them potentially with this MSBA project that we're obviously proposing. There's obviously a maintenance aspect of that then comes into the factor after, let's say, successful building and implementation of that school system, but we'd be starting fresh to some degree.
You're correct. So the one thing I caution there is we spend most of our time in our newest buildings right now. So, center school, you know, with all due respect, the systems have failed there and are
You know where the
offline.
problems are.
You know, so we just can't touch them, there's nothing we can do. That's why we're, you know, going for a new combined school complex. But so if the project does come to fruition and we do have a new center school at some point, that's gonna need the same amount of maintenance going forward. We won't be a backlog.
Right.
But it'll still need that amount of maintenance to maintain it. So,
We have a slight respite.
yeah,
For the
and
time
again,
being.
when you get to newer systems, when they fail, it's more noticeable. And that's why we spend most of our time at the high school, in the middle school, and at RO, because those systems are newer, and when they fail, they're known about. When a system fails well, they've all failed at the other schools, it's not as noticeable.
Sure.
So again, a new school would just eliminate the backlog.
Right.
It's not gonna eliminate the need for continued maintenance going forward.
Excellent.
And that 5.1 doesn't go away because of the 3 schools. That has all the schools. in
Yeah,
that
and again,
5.1.
so if the other 3 schools come off our rolls, our square footage, we'll roll a new square footage in, and we'll probably be in the same ballpark.
Interesting question that comes up on that. So, using the example of a new school, right? That would obviously cancel or reset some portion of the backlog, which creates, I think, the suggestion that, well, if we wait long enough, the problem will go away. I think we can all intuit both that that's a foolish strategy, and that there's more things to concern ourselves with than just the economic impact of a decision. But focusing on that economic impact, are there any good studies, any good models, any good predictions about the long-term hard dollar costs, real dollar costs that we incur by kicking the can down the road?
That's a great question. It's a tough number to put on, but our software company that does our work orders, they estimate it as 4 to 1. So every dollar that you don't spend in preventative maintenance costs you $4 down the road in a capital cost or replacement. So that's a very simple term, but that's one number that I see a lot. But that's an excellent question, and it's a study that, you know, it really depends on where you are and what publication you're looking at. But the one I keep on seeing is 4 to 1. So it costs you, $4 if you don't spend the dollar.
Wow.
Mr. Field, can you
Yeah.
give us an idea of what kind of preventative maintenance orders are being completed right now versus what kinds of things are, getting deferred?
Unfortunately, there's only 255 of them, but they're basically, checking, clean, and univent. I mean, it's something that every year, every quarter, you should be opening that univent, cleaning it, changing filters, changing belts, tightening everything, make sure everything's working in order so you don't have a failure when you need it. That's a typical PM, a boiler check to go through the boiler, give it a, cleaning, make sure valves work. Every piece of equipment we have has a PM to it. So most of them just aren't getting done to the extent they should be.
Okay, thank you.
Quick question. The building maintenance requested 2019, 10,000, 2020 requested 20,000. Is that just trying to play catch-up, or is that something specific you're trying to do?
I'm sorry, where are you?
Page 65, 3/4 of the way down, the building maintenance.
Under buildings and grounds, I'm sorry? You want,
Yep.
Yep.
I don't have that packet, I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Mike, you got it.
Oh, yeah, so, I'm sorry, the increase we're requesting is just to come closer
Okay.
to what our real spending has been. Now, we typically overspend many accounts, and that's one of the ones we typically overspend, and we're just trying to come closer to it. Whether we can actually afford that is another question, but. And I think my last example goes to our fleet. So this is a little easier to imagine, and we have some concrete numbers here, but We track our fleet characteristics and our age of our fleet. So we know that both in operations and water, so operations is DPW administration, highway and buildings and grounds, and water is water enterprise. We know what our age of our fleet is and what our target replacement age is. Our target replacement age is depends on the composition of the fleet. So we look at our light duty vehicles, administrative vehicles should be retired at 7 years. As we move further down the line to our heavier vehicles, it'll be 9 years, 12 years, and then 15 years for our heaviest vehicles, like a 10-wheeler or a loader or a backhoe. So based on the composition of the operations fleet, our target replacement age should be 12.19 years. On the water side, it should be 10.38. Our current retirement age, replacement age for operations vehicles are 22.08. So we're holding them 10 years too long. And on water, it's 13 years. So we're holding them about 3 years too long. On the water side, I should mention that the reason that is that way is we're holding a spare backhoe that's been retired, but we're just holding on to it until it needs a significant repair. We use it for plowing. So that's kind of skews the number. Water has the ability through the enterprise fund to better fund the replacement of their vehicles at the proper times. So water is much closer to the target retirement age than the operations side. We should be spending overall on our fleet $600,000 a year. Over the last 4 years, we've been underfunding that by $221,000 a year. So I believe 5 years ago, our replacement age was about 19 years. Now it's up to 20 for the entire fleet. So we're getting older because we're not spending the money on replacements. So what does that do? Does it just make our fleet older? It actually drives up our costs significantly for repair. So I looked at our repair budgets, and this is just parts and materials, not labor or anything else. DPW operations, where we hold our vehicles 10 years too long, versus water operations, we hold them about 3 years too long. We pay significantly more per vehicle for the DPW fleet. It's the same mechanics and the same vendors we're getting our materials from. It's just the fact that with the older vehicle on DPW side, we spend $2,260 per vehicle compared to $690 per vehicle for a water vehicle to maintain it. So if you repair DPW vehicles for the same price you're repairing water vehicles, we would save $75,000 a year just on materials, parts and materials. And then looking at the frontline pieces as another example, because the frontline pieces are really the ones that get most of the maintenance. Those spare vehicles don't go very far, and like in the case of some of our vehicles, they're used only in snow operations. Those maintenance funds come from the snow budget. So looking at the 28 pieces that are frontline pieces, we spend $4,492 per vehicle on the DPW side compared to $815 on the water side. And that's $103,000 a year. So between $75,000 and $103,000, we're spending too much because we're holding those vehicles too long. And again, it's the same vehicles, the same vehicles, same type of vehicles, characteristic of vehicles, same repair technicians, and the same vendors. But it's just a demonstration of what not replacing your fleet or any asset in a timely fashion costs you more money.
How do those numbers compare to the fully loaded amortized cost of replacement vehicles?
So in my capital presentation, I go through the life cycle value of a vehicle, and it's basically a U-shaped curve. You have the capital cost of the vehicle that declines over time, and then you have the repair and maintenance, which goes up, and it makes a U-shaped curve.
Sure.
And the goal is to really land that retirement at the lowest point on that curve. And for water, we're pretty much doing that. We're retiring them. Oftentimes, they actually go to DPW because there's older equipment on our side that we retire after that. And so we're holding those vehicles too long, and that life cycle cost is significantly higher than it should be. I don't have the numbers on exactly how that is, but I can tell you what the impact is on our maintenance budget.
You know, to be clear, I'm struck by the numbers. I was just curious. I haven't any sense of the replacement cost for a vehicle and how that would be, level amortization spread out over the life of the vehicle.
Yeah, so
I'm
are we,
just wondering if this number is greater than what that would be. I suspect it is, and by how much, or if it's similar.
so looking at our current replacement cost of our fleet, I estimate at $6.9 million. So along those lines, taking that divided by the target replacement age, we should be spending $600,000 a year. That's where I come up with that number.
Got it.
And we're not doing that, in that way, and we haven't been doing that, and our fleet's gotten older since I started tracking this. And again, those numbers are pretty startling on the maintenance aspect of it. And that has nothing to do with decrease in level of service, those vehicles not being available when they're needed, and the actual labor that it takes to maintain those. That's just parts and materials.
Yeah.
When those are retired, excuse me, when those are retired, assuming they're retired completely out of service, they're not moved to a different department, is that kept around for spare part, like taking? it
No,
apart
not
and using
often.
it?
Most of the time, these vehicles, when they're 22 years old on the DPW side, the corrosion is so heavy that, and they're obsolete.
Yeah.
You know, they're not really replacing a vehicle that's around anymore. So we auction them off, and they're auctioned off. We actually have a revolving fund which started last year. It's actually working out very well for us. So we have a revolving fund, and we can use that to make additional vehicle and equipment purchases. I think we've collected about almost $30,000 in auctions from this past year. So that helps us to get a new plow or something like that as needed for our fleet.
Awesome, thanks.
I noticed on the snow and ice budget, it goes in back, so I'm out of nowhere. On the snow and ice budget, the increase in cost per inch was up over the average 5-year. Is that being driven by increased maintenance costs or something else?
No, so the snow and ice, the cost per inch is, it's really driven on the snowstorm. So if we had a 12-inch storm, it really helps your cost per inch go down versus we had a lot of smaller storms, 1-inch, 2-inch storms. And you have a fixed cost on response. We have to go out, we have to salt the roads before, we have to salt the roads after. It's just that time in between. And if you have a slow event where you get just a few inches of snow, it can cost as much as a larger event that comes quicker. So the cost per inch is, it's just a metric we use, but in general, it's really indicative on the amount of events you had and the amount of snow you had. So with that, I think I'm done. I don't want to be doom and gloom. The DPW does a great job. All my guys do a great job. My supervisors do a great job. We want to do the right job. These are concerns I have going forward, that continuing to underfund these items will become a problem at some point. I mean, as you can see, and as you see, our current building stock, all of our assets, if you don't adequately fund them, we'll pay more in the end.
Any further questions for David or for Jack?
I just have one quick question, and just want to say thank you for all your work and all the work you guys in the department as well. When it comes for the emergency services side of it and the state funding for that from, like a state of emergency declared by the governor, how much do we actually receive back, and where is that reflected in the budget?
So that doesn't get put into my budget. That goes, when we have a declared emergency, and we work closely with Chief Partridge for those FEMA reimbursements, it's generally about 75% of eligible costs can be reimbursed, and that goes into usually several years later, and that goes into the general fund. I don't know if Wendy has any input on that.
It would be subject to appropriation
Yeah,
by
just-
town meeting. We usually call it out, because there's usually, I think we recently received, did we get a refund for, I think, Nemo? Which was 5 years ago?
No kidding.
Right.
Yeah, so it doesn't directly impact our budget. We,
Not easy to point.
as with anything, a snowstorm or windstorm, we take care of the emergency as it stands. We don't worry about funding necessarily. We'll figure that out in the days, weeks later. But we just take care of the emergency as needed.
Thank you.
Quick question. So on the community expenditure comparison report, those are the same towns that we were benchmarked against, probably, right?
In the audit, yes.
In the audit?
Yes.
And then, so that includes, we have the core communities, and then we have neighboring. I just think it's worth reading these off so people at home
Please
know
do.
what towns we were benchmarking came in, basically at the bottom of that. So the core communities are outlined as Ashland, Canton, Chelmsford, Dedham, Foxborough, Mansfield, Marshfield, Walpole, and then our neighboring communities, Norton, Raynham, Sharon, and Stoughton.
And just as a data point in there, I think that the percentage variance for DPW compared to that core group is something like 27% less spending per capita, which speaks to what we're talking about.
Thank you.
Dave, I understand your comment about the fact that it may lead to a challenge, but I would argue that we already have challenges, current, present. I don't think you didn't mean that either by your comment, but I think the slides where you talk about the problems that existed for several years leading into this, I'll probably lead with, you're gonna say yes to this, but I don't think you see or foresee that changing anytime in the near future based upon the information that you have on hand.
No.
So as we're currently positioned, we're challenged. Because we have aging fleets and assets, it's costing us more to maintain an operating expense. And if that fact is anywhere near the truth, every dollar we delay is $4 that's gonna come down the road. That seems like a heck of a cocktail, that doesn't seem like it's adding up to success. So I just think it speaks to the challenges that we brought up with the budget subcommittee, that we heard with the school, about challenging decisions that are being made now that have what I'll call pretty near concrete consequences in the very near future that will place further pressure on our expenses on that side. So thank you so much for doing what you do with. I don't think we feel like we go without, but I think you open our eyes up to what the reality could be of the potential. And Jack, 39.5 years, that's a long time. My kids still talk about going to the water division and celebrating Water Day from town of Easton. So I appreciate everything you've done and your team as well. Same thing, Dave.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Chief Partridge?
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening, Chief.
Chief.
evening.
I'd like to stop by congratulating Jack on his future retirement and his success that he's had here in Easton. And also thank Jamie Stebbins, who's my new liaison to the fire department, and for reaching out and spending some time together to get to know the department and the budget. So I appreciate your time, Jamie. So the department continues to provide high level of service in the community. Last calendar year, the department responded to 3,733 calls for service. 2,248 of those calls were EMS related and 1,485 fire and other calls. In 2018, there were 2,248 EMS related calls, which was an increase of 143 calls over the previous year. Approximately 7% increase in EMS-related calls. Our transports were also up for those incidents. Total number of transports was 1,970 transports. That included mutual aid. This was an increase of approximately 155 transports, or 8.5%. So we continue to see an increase in the services needed by the department. Easton ambulance transports were up by 186, increase in transports, and mutual aid was down to 80 calls. So the increase in the personnel that we brought onto the department, keeping 2 ambulances in service all the time, has allowed us to decrease our necessity of calling mutual aid in about 4 years by over 120 calls. So we were doing nearly 200 mutual aid calls a year. The department, again, continues to see a lot of increased calls to these medical facilities and assisted living facilities in town. Those calls make up, there's about 12 facilities in town that make up about 50% of all the calls that we're doing. We've seen an increase in the last 3 or 4 years of a lot of medical facilities in town, and it's really provided or required an increase in services from the department.
Was it 50 or 15? Sorry.
50%.
50, 50.
Yes, yes.
So Chief, you're talking about like walk-in care places, things like that?
Yes.
Someone goes in and
Yep.
says, my
Yeah,
chest hurts.
nursing home, the 2 nursing homes, the assisted living,
Sure.
the medical facilities, Roach Brothers Way, 21 Bristol Drive, all those facilities.
And so somebody walks in, they think something, I'm gonna see the walk-in, and then they say, you're in some trouble, they call you.
Correct.
Right.
Yep. The ambulance revenue continues to come in at at a decent rate, although we have seen it level off over the last couple of years. This year, we are on track to be right about the $1.5 million that we anticipated, and probably a little bit over what we collected last year. So those 12 locations that we go to and that take up 50% of all our calls are mostly Medicare, Medicaid-related facilities. And unfortunately, the amount of reimbursement that we get from those calls is about 10 to 15% of what the invoice is that goes out for that particular call. If it was a non-Medicare, Medicaid-related, Blue Cross Blue Shield, other health insurance, we would see a lot more reimbursement. So although we're doing a lot more calls, we're not getting the revenue because it's related to those two revenue sources. I would like to speak to the excellent work that all our EMTs and paramedics do on the department. They run every day, very busy, from minor cuts to major significant motor vehicle accidents, requiring helicopters, serious trauma. And I am proud to say that the department did receive an Exceptional Response Award this year from the Bristol North EMS. We were nominated by the Good Samaritan Hospital for the excellent treatment on one particular call by the paramedics, but I can tell you that they do that on every call that they go to. We do get a lot of high praise from residents about our personnel.
You actually
on
do
the work
customer satisfaction surveys, correct?
Correct. We, the ambulance billing company that does the billing for us also sends out patient satisfaction surveys, and we do get a very good praise about the work that our people are doing. So I compliment them on the work that they do. Excuse me. And we haven't stopped doing fires. We still respond to fires here in town. Fire-related incidents are up as well. Even taking out the 400 business assist calls, which we no longer do. I mentioned last year where we upgraded the fire alarm system several years ago, and the dispatchers now have the capability of taking radio boxes on and offline. So we no longer have to take a fire truck to go plug out a box. So that number of responses went down 400 calls. We still saw an increase of 220 fire-related incidents last year. We did have several notable incidents in town. March 17th, we had a structure fire right on Route 138, fully involved house fire. July 4th, it seemed to be the year of holidays. We stacked up many calls on holidays. July 4th, we had a house fire on Lancelot Road. Even though one crew was at the hospital in the ambulance, we still had a quick response. They were able to get in pretty quick. Unfortunately, it did get into the roof, and there was a lot of damage to that. It was a 90-degree day, so it made it very difficult for the firefighters. We continue to go to Lee Circle, Pocket Terrace. We had several stovetop fires there, and we do that every year to keep us busy. And we do go in there with fire prevention because that's a target audience for us. And 2019 has started off to be another busy year. New Year's Eve, we had a trailer fire in the mobile home park. All personnel were in quarters, and that doesn't happen that often. There's usually an ambulance call, the ambulance is at the hospital, but everybody was in quarters. The first engine was on scene in 4 minutes of the call. We were able to confine that fire and keep it to half the trailer, saving a lot of the belongings of the people that lived in that trailer, and that makes a big difference. Having the staffing ready to respond is huge for us. Same thing on the next following day, we had the Dean Street fire. Unfortunately, there was a death not related to the fire, predeceased from the fire, but all personnel were in quarters, so we were able to have a quick response to that as well. Nancy Road, we had a condo fire, and yep, once again, everybody was fortunately in quarters. In 4.5 minutes, we were on scene. They confined the fire to, it was major damage to the one unit. It started in the roof, so it went unnoticed for a while. confined it, major damage to that, and it extended to several units because we had a significant number of our personnel were able to respond and handle that fire. So I'm gonna talk line by line about the increases in my budget. It starts on page 46. If you have questions about them, please feel free to stop me each one. So the total budget increase on the fire budget is $96,200 in your book, but there is one line item that needs to be changed, the deputy chief line item. It needs to be adjusted down to $103,199.22. It was one step higher than it should have been in the pay scale. So normal step increases for the fire chief and the deputy chief. The public safety personnel line item actually is going down. We had 3 retirements of 35-year members, one being a captain, one being a lieutenant. So the replacements hires was a significant saving from that, in spite of, you know, some people moving into new lieutenant and captain's position. They were at lower steps, lower rates, so there was a savings there. Career incentive increase is a contractual increase of both the amount per credit and then also some additional degrees that are being allowed. And then the overtime line items are being adjusted. There are 2 that stand out. Some are minor increases based on the 1% increase that was allowed in the contract. The 2 that I'm looking to increase up higher than that is the sick time coverage. I'm trying to get that line item to where it's more in line with what we're actually spending. If you look at previous years' spending, that line item has always been underfunded, and it just leads me to a point where, you know, I have to make a decision on, can I do any training? Do I need to reduce overtime in other areas in order, because that line item always was higher. So trying to get that up to where it's traditional spending's been. And then the overtime for training coverage, I am trying to increase the amount of training for the personnel on the department. Many of the kids that we're hiring have never driven a fire truck before. They've never driven anything bigger than maybe a pickup truck. So we do a in-house training with them. We put them behind the wheel for some time, and they say, go at it. And it's a real big concern for me. So we need to look at getting.
They don't do that in the academy?
No, they don't get to drive trucks at the academy. So it's on us to do that. So,
You know, like, hey, take
and
it for a spin.
I am sending.
Yeah, so.
Back it up.
Yeah.
Is your repair budget going up because of that training?
No. I am sending 5 of the new individuals. The academy does run programs, but not when they go to recruit class. You have to send them to separate. So I am sending 5 individuals to an academy class, but we need to do more of that. We even need to continue doing it with our veterans on the department. Because they do it every day. They drive a truck every day, and you know, if something happens, it's going to be you know, a tragic thing. So we want to make sure that we're providing enough training for those individuals. Other areas are to try to provide some professional development and officer training for our personnel, including senior firefighters, who many times, if the officer is off or the senior firefighter may be in a position, we want to get them to some of these training classes that are available to them, seminars and conferences. So I'm looking to increase that line item to be able to do that.
Would having extra personnel, like public safety personnel, impact the overtime budget in a meaningful way, or?
Having more?
Yeah, having additional.
It can, but usually having additional helps on the shift coverage, but not if I want to send individuals out to, like when they're off duty, is usually when they do it, or if they're on duty and I send them, I gotta cover that. So it does require overtime. And let's go back up to administrative salaries. At the top, I forgot to talk about that one, but that is another request to increase staffing. It's a part-time clerical position, administrative position in the office. And that's to help provide the administrative duties of payroll. Currently, I have no backup on payroll. Many times, if she's taking time off, she's in on the weekend, Sunday, doing payroll. And if something happens and she can't do payroll, you know, we're gonna be scrambling to.
Have you ever run into that?
And we haven't yet, knock on wood, no.
So, Chief, just to be clear though, for folks to understand, so you have how many, you have 43 total personnel in the department,
Correct.
and that includes one?
Nope, 44, including
44.
the administrative assistant.
So there are 43 other staffers, and you have one administrative person
Yep.
currently, and that's the same amount of administrative people you've had since?
Yes.
Forever?
Yeah, forever. So other things would be the ambulance billing. As I mentioned, we're getting much busier with the ambulance. And even though we have an ambulance billing company, a lot of work still needs to be done to get the preliminary information from the hospital, to get that to the billing company, and it does require time from the administrative assistant to do that. She also supports, the one that I have now supports 3 people in the office, myself, the deputy, and the fire prevention officer, and they are much busier. We're starting a commercial and industrial business pre-planning program, gathering information, and that's gonna require somebody to be putting all that information into the computer.
Chief, I'd just like to mention
Yep.
too, the time-sensitive nature of, although we have this third-party billing, Pam's required to get this information. If we want to be high on the priority list to get reimbursed.
Yep.
So, you know, that's a lot put on her to make sure that that information is submitted immediately to the right parties.
Correct. Particularly with Medicare and Medicaid, there are time limits on submittal of those, so if we miss the window, we're out.
And Chief, this one administrative person is also the person who supports the CERT team, which is all volunteer, correct? Right.
Yep. So we also manage, we have numerous grants that we manage. I'm sorry to say, we don't have a good inventory program, and that's one thing that I'm gonna talk a little bit later about, some software to help us get to a better inventory program, and this administrative person will help us, you know, be able to have a better inventory system, including documenting our maintenance. Everything's paper as far as our vehicle maintenance right now. We have nothing, we have no computer program and no data entry related to that. As Connor mentioned, Pam, who's the current administrative assistant, oversees the CERT program. She's the CERT manager
Which is the community
as well.
emergency response team.
Correct.
And just to tell a little bit about what they
Sure.
do too, if there's an extended, emergency response, we've got community volunteers that will come and help to make sure our firefighters, officers are all, either getting food on site or just different things to make sure that
Right.
we're part of that response. And then it could be a FEMA or some other large, it could be a NEMA or FEMA incident, and these folks are volunteering and some of
Yep. Yep, we have 31 members now. We've run 2 programs over the last 2.5 years to train people up. They've actually operated and ran the shelter twice now. Before that, we had myself, Pam, a couple people at the Board of Health that ran the shelter. It didn't work. And thank goodness we didn't have, 100 people come in the shelter. Now we have a decent team that's trained up, equipped. So over the last couple of years, we've been buying, shelter equipment from the grants. She oversees that, she manages that, she continually trains with them. So I'm sure you've seen them around at different events and stuff. But that's what the team does in town. They're very, very supportive, and I thank them. And then we also have interns that come in frequently from the Mass Maritime Academy and the Senior Tax Program. So we'd like to have somebody in the office that manages that, and we're assigning them work for them to do. So that's why I'm looking to increase the staffing, get that part-time clerical person in there to help us in the office as well. And that was one of my override requests back several years ago when we did that. There's, back to the list below, there is a sick time buyback in there for one of the firefighters requested his sick buyback. They can do that under contract. He may even be retiring in the next year, and he's entitled to that. Specialty pays have gone up. We also, through union contract, they've gone up, and we added a few specialty positions in there. And we just grouped those all under one line item now, rather than have numerous separate specialty pay line items. And then, under the emergency management stipend, I receive a stipend as the emergency management director, and I'm proposing a stipend for Pam Berglund, who runs the CERT team and manages the CERT team in this year's budget as well. Just a little bit on the, you heard earlier that sometimes we're eligible for FEMA reimbursements from storms. Those are the storms that raise to the level that meet the minimum threshold that the federal government sets for damage. It's done by county, so if the county reaches the threshold, then we're eligible. The last one was the spring nor'easters that we had, so we have received one payment for the emergency services for police, fire, and shelter already, and we're waiting on the DPW on that one. So they were a little expedited this time. The Sandy and the Nemo storms, there was issues, and they got tied up in FEMA. So not issues with us, issues with FEMA.
Chief, in terms of payroll,
Yes.
I believe it's 2 years ago now, we added 4 positions related to the FEMA Safer Grant.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that over time, that grant's reimbursement rate declines.
Yes.
And at the time, we appreciated the opportunity to add the personnel at a dramatically reduced impact to our operating budget.
Yep.
But I believe we indicated by the time we concluded that period of time, we would either be through attrition, retirements, vacancies, and/or the ability to fund for those positions would be there.
Yes.
How do you feel about that as we roll into years where we're paying more of
Yep.
those annual amounts?
So it's in my ambulance budget, and I plan to speak to that. So this year.
I apologize if
No,
I'm
it's
ahead of
okay,
you.
that's okay. In this budget, it goes from 6 months being, 7 months being at 75% reimbursement, and 5 months at 35%, so we dropped down. So the increase to my ambulance budget is about 77,000 to cover that difference. And then in the following fiscal year, we'll have 6 months at 35% reimbursement, and then we assume it by December of this year, everybody, I might have another retirement coming, but I have 4 individuals right now that were recently hired that have not been trained. By December, they will all be trained. And on a group, my overtimes should be coming down at that point. And if not all of the additional costs will be covered, it's gonna be close. It's looking like we're heading that way. I have 9 on a shift right now. And I've seen already a decrease in the overtime costs. So I am confident that once we get to the 10 on shift, we will be staffing to 8 minimum around the clock. And we're doing that pretty much all the time right now with the 9. So I'm comfortable that, we may have, if not all, very close to what we need for that staffing.
To cover that cost.
Yep.
Excellent. So in essence, we continue to be on course to execute the plan we pretty much that you put in place 2 years ago.
Yes.
All right, thanks.
Yep. Any questions on the fire side, payroll? And I'll talk a little bit about the fire expenses. Several increases I'm looking for. Training expense to be able to send the individuals on the department to various training conferences and training classes, and also to bring in several companies under contract to provide either driver training, pump operations, gas meters, et cetera, the areas where we need the training. Building and grounds, I'm looking to increase the budget to 20,000. Last year, we took over that line item from the DPW. It came to our budget, and that, the 14,000 that I had, it needs to go up. The 20,000 is to maintain 3 buildings, the newest of which was built in 1986. So they're just getting, as David said, we're putting out the fires, we're handling the 911s, we're just fixing the problems and doing very little upgrades. I can tell you Station 1, built in the 60s, needs work. It needs more than just a little bit of the TLC that we're giving to it. It's got leaky roofs that we continue to repair, plumbing problems, heating system problems, so something major needs to be done to take care of that building.
Plumbing issues, issues with proper amount of bedding for, space for firefighters. Just speak to the bathroom, the issue with bringing on female firefighters, so, having the space for both male and female. Sort of, buffer issues.
Yeah, so obviously the space, we've grown quite a bit since that time, and the building space doesn't work as not enough bedding. We have 1 bathroom, so we have a lock on it. We have females on the department now, so that's the one station that it really doesn't meet, the needs. We're making it work. We're looking into some changes that we need to do. I am happy to say that Station 2 is gonna finally get its addition and renovation by Mr. King. He's agreed to move forward with that, so within the next 3 weeks or so, we should start seeing some work taking place at that building. There will be a groundbreaking at some point in the not-too-distant future, so we're happy about that. Although it's going to be newly renovated, as David said, we still need to look at making sure we're maintaining the facilities as well. $500 in custodial supply increase, and then $13,000 under computer hardware, software, and I'd like to speak to that. Couple things that I'm trying to do and bring the department into a little more of the technology era. And one is that we've been outfitting all our ambulances and our fire trucks with computers and the links inside the truck to tie to the internet, to be able to provide them with not only their reporting capabilities in the truck, real-time information from the dispatch will be able to be relayed, and then information about a particular commercial building that they may respond to can be brought up on the screen, where the Knox boxes are, where the fire department connections are, a lot of information that they need when they're responding to the call. So we're excited about that moving forward. Also, we've started a new web-based service for time off and attendance for the personnel. The town did receive a grant for that. We did use a portion of the grant to be able to take care of the first year, the training side of it and stuff. And that's gonna be included in my budget, so $2,500 of that request will help cover that annual fee that we have for doing that. That's gonna help to improve, get away from paper. Everything right now is done with paper slips and time off tracking. We're gonna get away from that. Volgistics is another software program that's approximately $500. That's for our CERT team. It's gonna be for tracking all their responses, training, and actually to be able to send out a message that, hey, we need assistance at the shelter, please sign up when you're available. So that's gonna be a tool for us to use. The big portion of it is for what's called Lexapol program. It's for, they do it all across the country. They're doing it in 25 states now, both police and fire department policies and procedure manuals and training. They're gonna develop if I had to guess right now, we have maybe 30 to 40 written policies for the department. The service that they're gonna provide will be approximately 140 different policies, already vetted in Massachusetts here, written for a lot of Massachusetts departments. They would tweak them to ours, and provide weekly training on the policies to the firefighters through email, that they have to read, review, and some may involve a small verification that they've read and understand it. And then it's also gonna be used for our SOPs, for responses on different calls, on how we do things. The training bulletins will also cover those as well. That's the annual fee, $9,151 for the program. It's gonna help us to, improve our training, but also reduce liability down the road. I've applied for an AFG grant through FEMA to help to get that taken care of for the first year. I won't hear till probably May or June on the grant.
I'll try to make this the last time I interrupt.
No, please do.
If anyone gets a chance, and they can take a look at Dr. Atul Gawande's book, Checklist Manifesto, and I'm sure there's people in this room that have read it, it'll really hit home some of what these SOPs, and that comes from a medical perspective as well. Some of the scenarios that are given in that book talk about just life-saving, how much they've improved prognosis of people in life-to-death situations through having standard operating procedures in place. It's a great read, and it really starts to make this stuff, you really bring into perspective, especially when you've got a crew of, an ambulance crew that's calling ahead and is able to give some really quick information to the medical professionals in a trauma center and preparing in advance any life-saving equipment they need.
What was the name of that book, Jamie?
It's Checklist Manifesto, and it's by Dr. Atul Gawande. It's a quick, easy, and well worth the read.
Thank you.
I meant to read off when I was talking about the need for training, continual training for our people. Currently on the department, 42% or 17 members of the department have been on the department under 5 years. 50% have been on the department less than 10 years, and 72% have been on less than 15 years. All of the current officers in their position, 2 of them were lieutenants when I got hired, but everyone else has been appointed by me. And I'm in my 8th year. So our experience level, we're a growing department, or a young department. The officers haven't been doing this a long time. We need to continue training and provide improvements in that area.
Chief, excuse
Yes.
me, are any of the training initiatives mandated that you're talking about here?
A lot of the EMS ones are mandated. They're mandated to do a certain number of hours every 2 years. They have to recertify. We bring in training in-house. They have to do rounds, so it does cost overtime to send them to that. And a lot of times they can go out and get additional training outside.
Mhm. And you said you have 30 to 40 written policies today, with a delta to go to 140. Are any of those critical policies that?
Yeah, all the ones so they're both fire and EMS policies. I would say they're all critical. And if I had the time and the staff, we would have 140 of our already done. This company is gonna come in and do that for us. If I get the grant from FEMA, they're gonna take all hours, incorporate them, find the one that matches, and incorporate them into the full set of policies. If I don't get the grant, we're gonna have to do that. We're gonna have to take theirs and change it to meet Easton Fire, because it's written generically for a fire department. So I would have to put in the time to do it if I don't get the grant, so. Any questions on the fire budget and the ambulance budget? I already addressed the SAFER grant. The 4 SAFER hires are under the ambulance budget. We have 8 personnel that are under that. And again, this year, we're gonna transition from mid-years from 75% to 35% reimbursement from FEMA. And that's of the total of the four. So obviously, the amount the town needs to contribute is going up, and that's about $77,000 for that. In addition to that, as I mentioned, the union contract, they received a 1% increase this past year. Career incentive also went up. They were getting an additional amount per credit, and also opened up the amount for degrees. That's going up by $13,165. Some of the overtime line items are going up. Again, the big overtime line item is my request for additional overtime training for the members. And then we rolled all the specialty pays together into one line item. And again, we added some additional EMS specialty positions on the department. Expenses, looking to increase the training budget by $2,000 to bring in or send personnel to conferences or EMS training. Outside the department, communications increasing by 1,500. That's for all our two-way radios, and also for now our iPads and our vehicle internet, etc., to maintain that. And then acquisition of new equipment, $2,500 increase. We're maintaining 3 ambulances now. Last year, we put the third one in full service. So we have 3 trucks that can respond to calls. Normally, 2 are staffed. If we get recall personnel, we can send the third truck. Right now, it fills in as a spare if one vehicle's out for maintenance. So we need to, there's a lot of equipment on there. It's not perishable goods, which is medical supplies. They're the longboards, air splints, all of those related items.
Chief, can I ask something? You started this conversation. What did you say your calls for service was most recently?
3733.
Okay. And so I went back and looked at the audit from 2016. It said your department had the second highest calls for service of our comps back then at 2240. So your calls for service have gone up by 65%
Yeah.
in 4 years. Okay. And you pointed out a few things that you were trying to address in this budget, some of these requests, but we realistically know are not all going to be able to be funded, given that we still have $1 million deficit. And it sounds like a lot of those are attempting to address the fact that, so we were fortunate, we got that SAFER grant, right? And that brought our staffing up to 40.
We're at 43 now, 40 on shift and 3.
And the average of our comparable communities 4 or 5 years ago was 45. And so we were already the second busiest. We've gone up by 65%. And with the help of the federal government covering most of the bill, we've been able to get close to the low end of average staffing.
Right.
And so the other items that you're asking about, you have thin staffing for administrative professionals, which results in you not being able to update and keep your policies consistent. So something that we talked about briefly Monday night was the mental health crisis, how that's impacting the schools. Does that play into this increase of calls for service of 65%?
I believe so. We do.
How does that affect you?
On a regular basis, we're doing, mental health evaluations, Section 12s. If not a couple a week, it's pretty close. That a lot of calls for mental health issues. So, in '98, there was a study done of the fire department, and at that time, they recommended the staffing levels to be at 12 per shift.
And we're at what now?
We're at 10 per shift
With
right now.
SAFER.
And that's with the SAFER grant.
And that was in 1998.
Correct. Yeah. So, yeah, I do hope that, if we're not able to absorb it by overtime, that we're able to continue funding, at 10, because I feel we should be at 11 right now, and in 5 years, you know, a goal is to be at 13. I know that that's what we should be operating right now. There should be, NFPA recommends 4 people per engine. We're running 2 people per engine. We run-
NFPA is?
in National Fire Protection Association.
Thank you.
We respond, if we have 8 on a shift, we're responding 8 to a call, and that's with the shift commander being on a line and attacking the fire, and not being in command until I arrive or a mutual aid company arrives. He's a working incident commander, which puts, you know, some safety concerns into play.
And to be clear, when you say to go from 10 to 11, you don't mean actually, that's not actually one person, right? Because you're 4 groups.
Correct.
So
Yes.
every increase per group that we're talking about, because you're a 24/7 operation.
Yes.
Is 4 staff people needed, right?
Yes, so it's 2 additional requests that I had that are not actually in the budget.
Right.
And
That
one
didn't
was
make
in
it
my
this
budget
far.
memo, was a full-time fire EMS training officer for the department. And then I'll be coming back at some point asking you for 4 additional firefighters, because we need to continue the growth. We are that busy. I think Jamie can attest to the day he came in to visit that there had to be 7 calls in like, 40 minutes. So.
Yeah, and then back.
Yeah. Yeah, all the time.
Right.
Yeah, so the town has grown. It's got a lot of needs that require our services. And 10 on a shift is just not where we need to be. We do need to look at increasing the firefighter staffing.
Couple comments. I think as a nurse in town at one of those facilities that calls way too often, I can speak to I understand your volume. Your staff is phenomenal. I encounter many of them.
Thank you.
We laugh. I see my cohort here on the weekends quite often, coming out on calls, mental health, medical falls. Training is key. As a healthcare professional myself, I see a lot of these young kids that you've brought on. They're phenomenal. I have had great dealings with everybody, but training's important. Experience is important. Minutes matter, life or death. This isn't an area that I personally believe should be, cuts should be considered. I think, God forbid, you're the one that has to call someday. I've had to call for my own children before. My daughter's one that got shipped up to Boston a few years ago for a horrible car accident. You want people who are fast and who are, prepared, and you want to make sure you have enough staff to get them there in time. So, all things to be considered.
Yeah. If any one of those house fires came in, if both ambulances
Yeah.
were committed on calls and those house fires came in, we're going with 4 people. And they're gonna do what they can to save anybody that might be, but there's not, a lot that 4 people are gonna be able to do with the many tasks that need to happen at a fire incident. If you've ever watched, a fire incident, a lot of things happen.
Any other questions for Chief Partridge? Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Chief.
Yep. Health and Community Services, Kristen, you're up.
Good evening.
Hi,
Kristen.
If you want to jump right into the top part of our budget, the actual staffing, any increases you see are contractual.
Sorry, Kristen, what page?
I have no idea.
Oh,
I don't
sorry.
know.
74.
72.
55?
72.
Sorry, 72.
74.
Sorry about that. So in the payroll portion of our budget, everything that you see is contractual, nothing that we have any control over. As we delve down into the other parts of our budget, you'll see the first 3 line items that you encounter show pretty significant increases over what was there before. In fact, 2 of them are brand new. Building, heating, and water are new to my budget. If you scroll down a little bit, you'll also see that the building maintenance line item has gone up significantly from $12,000 to $24,000. Dave Field alluded to this earlier. What we are trying to do with this budget is move line items that historically were over in the DPW's budget over into Health and Community Services budget, since we are the ones who are here in this building. When we formed this department, the cost of the cleaning bill was the only thing that was actually in our budget. We've realized some economics with the DPW's efforts in securing a single vendor for the cleaning across the town buildings, and we started taking on a few of our smaller bills with the money that was in our budget. What this proposal will do is move all of those costs over into us, our budget. One of the big benefits I see, and it's a very small example right now, is that in preparing these numbers, I had to look at everything. We're looking at the water cost, what it costs for a fire inspection, what it costs for our fire extinguishers to be recharged. And I noticed that our water bill was up, not a lot, from $21 a month to $35 a month. But it got me thinking. We found out we had a toilet that was running. So we're using more water, we're taxing our septic system, and just like at home, when the electric bill goes up, the person paying the bill makes sure the lights get shut off. We made sure that toilet got fixed. It's a very small number, but it's an example of how having this looked at by the individual living in the building, I hope will have a good impact. This will cover everything. These numbers are our best estimate. Again, we've looked at everything. We've looked back at 2 years' worth of bills. Pest control, alarm company, the phone bill. And these are numbers that I feel accurately represent what it costs to run Frothingham Hall on a day-to-day basis.
Kristen, if I may,
Sure.
when you do call for repairs, do you need to call the DPW, or are you calling your own contractor or service to come and repair?
So the money has been over in the DPW's budget, and we've put in work orders when we have a running toilet, when we have little things that go wrong, when we need something repaired. We had a toilet that needed to be replaced. And they've had the line item to pay the bill. What this will do is, I will now see that line item. I will know what that toilet cost. I will know what the consequences are of leaving the lights on and things like that. We still will use the DPW as our primary. We'll initiate the work order with them. If a plumber needs to be brought in, they will bring the plumber in. If we are talking about something that they can repair, we'll get the bill for the materials. We'll get the bill for anything, if it's overtime, if it's something that needs to be dealt with, I will see the number.
Thank you.
But they will still be our primary go-to, thank goodness.
Kristen, and Dave, is it fair to say, so this just moves a small amount of just the normal things we have to do, the fires that we're putting out in our buildings, a cost center going from DPW to your building effectively, because you had how many deferred maintenance orders?
7,000.
7,000, right. So so when your toilet's leaking, you can just get that fixed without adding and making that 7,001.
Correct,
Okay.
correct. Yes, when you hear Blue Man Group playing down in the basement, that is really not Blue Man Group, that is our antiquated boiler that does, a lot of times need some TLC.
That's like we should go with that.
As a recent example, I mean, if you want to go to those, we had a gasket go on a radiator earlier this week that bled out onto our brand-new rugs. And I believe they had to go out on the internet to actually find the gasket to replace it. It took days to be able to control that leak. And it's a small thing, but this building was built in 1902.
Did that happen on Monday night?
No, it did not.
That's just the normal
The Blue Man Group happens,
Yeah.
you can set your watch by Blue Man Group. In fact, they weren't kicking on. While you were here Monday night, I was actively texting our buildings and grounds supervisor who was trying to kickstart the boiler remotely from the computer system. It didn't come on when it was supposed to, Monday night.
It's probably why I had to get up and shut the door. The banging.
And Kristen, if I could just make one more observation, and I'll let everyone else do some talking. Your department is one of the examples. So the town talks a lot. We have the significant revenue problem that we have for many years. And we try our best to provide services that the community needs. And one of the things that we do to try to take pressure off of larger departments that have some significant needs is we look at how we're delivering those services and try to reorganize them when we can. And so Kristen's department is actually Board of Health, Veteran Services, Council on Aging,
Recreation.
and Recreation. And so 4.2% for the total bottom line increase in this department, which is, not to put you on the spot, but high for a town department, right? Because the overall town budget request increase for this year is right now at 2.92. You're actually in actual dollars within $2,000 of the actual budget before you reorganized in 2016.
Correct.
So in the interim, actually cut and saved money along the way.
We're lean, and we try our best to be efficient at what we do. We've done some restructuring of staff, we've
Right.
done some repositioning of individuals, which have realized savings. One of the biggest that I constantly go back to is that one of the restructuring pieces we did was we took our transportation coordinator and made that into a full-time position. What that has allowed us to do is very successfully avail ourselves of BATS. So we lease the buses. We run 4 buses. We run 50 to 60 rides a day. They're scheduled 1 day in advance because that's as far out as you can go. People are calling every day to add rides on. In the past, we were very reactive with any maintenance. If a bus went down, we called the tow, we had DPW, we had everybody involved, and we went down a vehicle. Having a full-time transportation coordinator, she actually is scheduling the preventative maintenance, and Dave has spoken already tonight about how important that is. We were not utilizing $1,500 a year allowance that BAT attaches to each of our leases for maintenance and repairs. We were very reactive in wanting to get the buses back on the road. We weren't doing any preventative maintenance. Now, we're considered the model town. When BAT has other people looking to sign these leases, they have them getting in touch with us about how to set the program up and how to run it efficiently. So we've done a lot, and we've been able to make some savings in some of those line items.
Little question, I guess.
Sure.
Town pool and the repair and maintenance and that. I just wonder, do the memberships and those fees offset the cost of running the town pool? Do we have a sense on that?
I do not have a number for that. Ann Daly, our recreation director, manages the town pool. And I don't have an answer for that. I can get you one.
Thank you.
So the next increase that you'll see in my budget is the training line item. I'm asking for an increase in $8,000 in that line item. When the 4 departments were combined back in 2016, Council on Aging brought $300 to the training budget, Recreation brought 0, and Veteran Services brought 0. While the Board of Health agents, myself included, are required to attend continuing education to maintain a bunch of our licenses, we also have a young staff and a very diverse staff that's being asked and called upon to provide a lot of services to a varied population. As I mentioned, we now have a transportation coordinator who's full-time. This past year.
It's the Blue Man Group. It's time for the concert.
We were able to get her into a program, and she was able to obtain a certificate from UMass specifically geared towards her job in organizing and managing senior transportation operations. Our outreach coordinator this past year received a certificate from Boston University on the Foundations for Aging and Disabilities. Our outreach coordinator and BSO have been attending classes through the Massachusetts Continuing Legal Education Company that deal with elder benefits, Social Security and SSDI, tenants' rights, maximizing income for the working poor, assisting families facing homelessness. These courses are only $27 a piece. but what they bring back to our environment, especially now that we've gone from a model where we had a part-time outreach coordinator who only dealt with senior affairs, to now having an outreach coordinator who routinely is working with the adjustment counselors at the high school and at the elementary schools and is covering the entire population. These are information and skills that are, I can't even put a price tag on. They are, everybody in my department is very excited about learning and excited about bringing back to the department what they learn. I'm excited about sending them. We only get better by having education and exposure to these things. Our administrative staff this Friday is actually going to a training on maintaining professional boundaries with older adults. That's not something you typically, our social workers, our outreach, our VSO, people that are involved in social work, talk about that frequently and are very well versed in it. I think it's incredibly important that my administrative staff, who's handling the phone calls and handling the walk-ins and the families at their worst, has the background and training as well. Our lead shuttle driver just attended a training where he, that was geared towards accident avoidance, actually took our bus over and was on a slip track and had his mirrors adjusted and came back. And he's been a professional driver for years, but felt that he learned quite a bit from that. We're taking it a step further, and our lead shuttle driver is actually going to be trained as a trainer and will be able to offer the training courses that our other drivers are required to have for MARTAP, the Massachusetts Accessible Transportation Program, that requires. So we're trying to bring some of our training in-house as well. So to ask for $800 really gives me the little bit of cushion to be able to send them to everything that I feel they need to go to.
Can I just say, it is $800 that you're asking
Yes.
for training? I think initially you might have said 8,000.
I'm sorry, it is 800,
Okay.
yep.
Yeah, no, thank you.
And if we go down to telephone, I'm asking for an increase there of $2,650. 720 of this is represented by contractual stipends that were added in the last contract with the Administrative Professionals Union. I don't have control over that. I'm also asking for this in that we're anticipating a reduction in the amount of funds that the Board of Health receives from its Emergency Preparedness Coalition grants. We don't have a finite number, but my representative on that coalition has been told not to expect what we have seen in years past. The number that you see presented, that 8,500, I feel more accurately represents the department's phone and technologies costs. And I think it's important to focus in on the word technology as we go through this. Our health inspectors use a tablet-based program to do their inspections. This was a system we went to back when we went to the electronic permitting, but it does have to have an internet connection. It has a lot of benefits to it in that we are able to email the inspection reports to the owners, to the operators. A lot of times it helps because we email straight to their corporate sponsors. So if there are maintenance issues that corporate needs to be aware of, they're aware of them and they're fixed more rapidly. This translates even in-house as we go through our school inspections. When we're done with the inspection report, it's automatically emailed over to the DPW. So any of the necessary repairs that need to be done, the notification is happening in real time. The DPW is notified directly by the health inspector with a copy of the report. Our outreach coordinator and veteran service officer are doing a phenomenal job. I could sit up here and speak for 2 or 3 hours about what the two of them have accomplished in the past year and a half. But one of the things that we've added that is really helping them do their jobs is they've each been outfitted with an iPad that has internet, has Wi-Fi connection and has data plans associated with it. What this allows them to do is when they go out to some of our most at-risk homes, they're able to scan documents and upload right into the platforms that they're using to secure benefits. Corey's able to connect to Chapter 115 and process a veteran's application right from somebody's living room. He's able to get into the VA platform and add information as it pertains to a VA claim. Kathleen's able to do a SNAP application with somebody who can't get out of their house, who can't find the paperwork. She's there and able to do it. This money, although the line item is telephone, it is telephone and technology, and it is absolutely necessary for them to provide the service that everybody is getting used to them providing. On the tail end, you will see that I'm decreasing the flags and markers. That's just another sign of the efficiencies that we keep seeing in the Veteran Service Department. The majority of the expenses, the flags, are reimbursable under Chapter 115. So going forward, they'll be paid out of the veterans' benefit line item because that's where we see and balance off what we get back through Chapter 115. The town pool has been moved over into its own line item, own subgrouping, so that we can keep it separate and kind of take a better look at it. There are no increases represented there, although it looks like there's zeros in years past. It's just that they're coming from other places up in the other budget and being grouped together and been assigned new account numbers. So the history doesn't follow because of the new account number. That's it.
Anybody have any more questions for Kristen? Thank you, Kristen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Library.
To get this out first. I know, it's the best one.
Did you not ever return? I don't think you did. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, this will make me actually have to come in. Is that an age-related remark?
I studied liberal arts for a reason. I don't know what this is.
Actually opening it right now, so I'm coming to it. All right, show and tell. Everybody see that?
Oh, look at you.
All right, nothing is selective audience.
Patrick broke it.
He's gonna be distracted for hours. It's great. Keep him busy.
That's it.
How do you know?
Not
How do you know what you're supposed to make it do?
Patrick already figured it out.
Yeah.
You work with
How you doing over there,
technology. Still, Florida.
Those are supposed to be
Good evening,
blue.
everyone. I'm Mayor Raymond, your friendly town librarian. And I'm here tonight with Jim Fowler, who's a treasurer of the board. He's also in our board of directors, but yeah, Jim is just a numbers guy, not a liberal arts. So I'm really thankful. So between the yin of my words and the yang of his numerics and statistics, hopefully we'll give you a holistic view of what the wonderful support that this town has given to the library has allowed us to do in the past year, our present, and how we are going to plan our future. So you have a sheet in front of you. There's a whole bunch about our library productivity statistics. I mean, we've had over 100,000 people, over 110,000 people come through the library doors. We've had almost 1,000 programs. 1,000 free programs a year. It's quite stunning. And almost 12,000 attendees for these programs. There's a bunch of numbers, and if you go into our monthly reports that are listed in the town website, you'll get a bunch of them. But as a librarian, I can't help telling stories because it's the stories that to me impart what's behind all these numbers. In the past 1 year, let's see, I think of the library as sort of a magical alchemy that takes place, and we have this magnifier effect. We get a little, and it turns into a lot. And I'm going to give you 3 simple examples, so you get a sense of how that happens in the library. Now, how many of you have not come to the library? Oh, don't put your hands up. If you haven't, please do come. It's a different lease at this point. So, Exhibit A, if you look at that board, trifold, in fact, that trifold was up in the State House earlier this month because the library was selected to be a showcase on things that are happening at our place. The podcasting at the Amesbury Library, there's an actual room that is a podcasting room. And how did it come about last year? Not with a whole bunch of dollars, but because an Easton resident, Bert Lewis, decided we should have podcasting over here. Considering there are 630,000 podcasts as of December 2018 nationwide, and about 44% of Americans are actually hooked onto podcasts, how many people are hooked onto podcasts here? Yeah? Does that look like 44% of the room? It doesn't. But take it from me, it's the happening thing, especially with the millennial generation. With 2 kids of my own, I know they're hooked onto it. Which is very surprising because you always think of it as a visual generation, but no, the lure of, it's the old time horses in the distance, and, it's the storytelling. There's a certain charm to it, and it's really caught on. So Bert Lewis decided we needed podcasting. It was with the genius of Bert who said, how do we get this going? We asked for some support. Bill Ames, a board member, provided some of the hardware. ECAT, the cable station, provided us with their hand-me-down acoustic sponges for the walls. A staff member provided a rug, and before you knew it, we have a podcasting room at Preset House. Now, typically, we have said that at Preset House, we're going to open a room every time we get a grant. The last time we opened the Digital Media Lab, we had got the Innovative Challenge grant from the state. So this tiny little room next to the Media Lab had remained closed until, without much funding, we get the input from Bert, donations from Bill, and podcast room is up and running. What does the podcasting room do? One, it's fun. Anytime you want to express yourself, you go in over there, you close the door, and it's just you and yourself. And you can say whatever you want, just read out recipes for your grandkids, it doesn't matter. But if you look, I don't know if you can see the picture at the bottom right over there, those are 2 gentlemen who've actually written a book and went out to try and turn that book into an audiobook and found that it was prohibitive. So they ended up going to the podcasting room every week and turning their written book into something that's an audio podcast, which they're hoping that some editor will pick up and take it up as an audio. So it can lead to a lot of things for this community. Again, it's a small idea with very little fiscal commitment, because all it takes is the 1 hour of time by Bert, who's a manager at Preset House every Saturday, and he does one-on-one instructions for people who want to use the room. But otherwise, it's the community's resource. Anytime. You book an appointment, and you go in and use the room, close the door, and do your thing. So that's one example. My second example is this. You wondering what that is? Even for a liberal arts person like Connor and myself.
Yay, liberal arts.
Connor, how do you know, is for a 5-year-old.
Solid, thank you.
And what
I did get it.
This is something that the friends of the library, you already got it. Okay.
I am apparently smarter than a 5-year-old does. You're in good hands.
It's the story behind it. I know it's showing lights now, but there's a great story behind it. It's the friends of the library who have a book sale room that's constantly open at Preset House. If you haven't seen it, please go and check it out. They have donated an expensive kit to us. It's called Little Bits. Little Bits is for the 5-year-old upwards. It's the first time I've used it. So as I said, it's non-age specific, it's non-gender specific, and what it does is introduce a 5-year-old to the concept of circuitry. Now, this is something you had to grow up. It required soldering, it required a bunch of dangerous things. What Pavement technology does is provides you, and then, oh, look at this, it's color-coded. 1 power source. You can go along with me if you do that. Let's see.
You can start from the beginning.
You've already got it. 1 connector. They're all tiny magnets, so you can't go wrong. The little kid can just click it on, which I can't, but here we go. Turn it on. You get the impression. You get the concept. here's your power source, here's your connector, and suddenly you're the circuit guard because you can get things to happen. Let there be light, there's light. I haven't given you this. Let there be movement.
Oh, you can do that.
She kept the good one?
Yeah.
I kept the good one. You have to come to the library for that.
I'm in.
Can you see
Look,
that?
look at.
It's
Go
fascinating.
ahead.
Now
Look
think
at.
of yourself as a 5-year-old.
I mean, it's.
That's easy
My
for
peers think
some
of
of
that
us.
too, so yeah.
This is the start of it. Just, you know, if A and B, then C happens. There's a man who came to the library with these can connect to a whole bunch of more elaborate systems. He connected it to an Arduino, to some Legos. And he actually had a soccer match on the floor of Chris's house with these little robots going and scoring goals. So the ability of the kid to project, it's just so heightened with these things. And for those of us who are Luddites and don't get into this, it's so great to be able to know that it exists. You don't look completely foolish when you're talking to a 7-year-old. So that's two. And while this example was to tell you that a little donation by the friends has gone such a long way in making sure that Easton does not suffer from the digital gap that is so endemic to many parts of the nation. Okay, my third last story. I promised Stephanie a short one. Last year, I don't know if you all remember this little box, you know, with the virtual reality that you download the apps in your phone, you put it in over here, it's $5, you're in your virtual world. Since then, we got a donation from a staff member for something a little more elaborate. This is not the one because it's checked out, it's always checked out. And we've gone past the entertainment stage to a point where we worked with the residents at Five Corners. They have something now called dementia experience. So you download that into your smartphone, check this out, and you can actually feel what a person with dementia, you can approximate it. Just as, just how the world looks, how it feels, the sounds. It was one of the most moving experiences I went through, and for those of us who have to deal with members who have dementia, it's just it's such a great thing to be able to empathize and to actually create a physical structure that is more conducive to their life. So whether it's from early literacy or it's making use of it for really important stuff. As I said, I'm always amazed at the multiplier effect that happens at the library. It's a small act that can spread out to so many parts of the community that it is quite astounding. So yes, look at all those numbers because there is a lot of productivity, but in terms of our budget, I have always said this and I'll say it again, Easton holds a really special place. We are very, very lucky to be in the situation that we are, which is that we have an incredibly generous community. 80% of these programs are offered by community members, just to share their skills. The town has always supported us so that we be above what is the state mandated requirement, which is at the middle of the paper. It's the state's municipal appropriations requirement, which is typically the last 3 years of appropriations given by the town to the library with the 2.5%, the average of the last 3 years with the 2.5% increase. And the town has been wonderful about never, actually, not since I've been there, thank goodness. So yes, I use this crude phrase, and I know it's crude, but it fits us so beautifully. Big bang for a really small buck. It really is. It is that multiplier. So, Jim, do you want to tell us some of your numbers, pictures, library, some endowments, and then talk a little bit about what's coming up?
The library has 3 main endowments, 2 of which we don't own. One is not on our balance sheet. It's clearly was gifted on behalf of the library with the sole beneficiary but we don't have any control of what it's invested in or how much money we give each year. It's managed by Bank of America and distributed to us annually. Unfortunately, that being the largest of our endowments, is based on a percentage of the prior year end's close of the market value of our investments. If any of you have stocks in the market, understand that this is a very volatile world today, and things go up and down on a monthly basis significantly, and December 31st was a tremendous downturn from December 1st to December 31st, almost as if somebody was playing with it to manipulate indices or something. But tremendous downturn in the market December 31st. Almost all came back in January, except for the fact our distribution is based on December 31st, and so the letter we got about 2 weeks ago says now that the distribution for that fund for next year is down to $8,000. It may come back somewhat if the year end, if the stock market in 2019, fiscal year the same as the town year, is better, but we have no guarantees. That's the distribution swap at this point. The other two endowments, one is from the Easton Community Co-op, which the town also has a number of departments which benefit from that. We're shareholders in the Easton Community Co-op, which distributes to the DPW, the fire, the school department, and I think the plumbing and all is one of them. About 4 organizations that are distributed from the Easton Community Co-op to the town, from the Ames family. Again, it's uncontrollable by us, but an annual distribution. Again, a flat income projected for them for next year. The last is one we have that we control ourselves, and that is, we have about $9 million with a private management firm that we can influence what is invested in and how much, roughly how much we draw from it. We draw about between 3 and 3.5% of that endowment each year, try to keep it balanced to its long-term growth and sustainability along with our needs. Fortunately, it looks like we're gonna probably have to put a squeeze on them to try to make up for this $40,000 from Bank of America, we don't have other sources that vary that significantly, so fundraising is an avenue for us, but that's about a $50,000 to $60,000 adventure for us to push that up to $100,000 would be probably reasonable budget standpoint. So we have the 3, and we draw the maximum, we spend the full distribution amount that we're getting each year. There was a time in the 80s and 90s when the market was really very strong. I would actually put aside significant amounts of money, and through that we funded the renovation of the Main Street and other things we've done in our capital. But that's our only source of capital funds as well. So always balancing, do we steal from there, which takes away our income for the future? We've been lucky in more recent times with grants, and we just got a payment finally. 9 months after the work was completed for grant for the parking area, Easton House, was finished and upgraded through the Mass Cultural Council. But it's you better fund that up front and sustain that working capital money for that period of time. We look for 2020 budget. We're looking at a slightly reduced earnings from our endowments. We're trying to push our fundraising up a little bit. That's, many do probably attend events there. That's not a primary thing as a library. We do believe in the term Ames Free Library. We try not to step on that term. But there are events that we can try to recover some value from. So
there's a lot of fun events, as I'm sure some of you can testify, and we've come to the open conclusion that anything that Lucas seems to do very well. But, we also have a lot of fun too. As Jim said that, we've had some very successful fundraisers, which I think financially does not bring us a huge amount of money. It brings the community together. Like it is just a lot of fun to watch that very different age group coming together. So I think of it as another program. We have a budget of $30,000 to $40,000 for fundraising, but it's just a good program.
summary picture of income for the library. About 49% of our funds come from our endowments. About 44%, 44% comes from local and state funding, from the town and from state. And the remainder comes from fundraising, and we have a small lease in the police house. And so that's kind of where our money comes from. Pretty consistent.
So,
because it's, sorry.
so your total budget request increase for the local share next year is 2.41%, correct?
Yes, and it's in real figures, it's got 13,000 difference. Yes, so as Jim said.
She's really the CEO of the library, you might call her librarian. She literally manages the budget, puts together the budget, manages it on a day-by-day basis, develops it. She is our CEO.
It sounds better than it is because, as Jim said, it's consistent. That's the nice part. There's a lot of consistency in our budget. There's a lot of consistency. The only thing that's not consistent is our desire to just, it's an exciting place, and people are exciting and do exciting things. So we certainly keep expanding that as much as we can. As Jim mentioned, for those of you who did the roller coaster ride to Quincy House, you can now skateboard. That is a thing of beauty. So please do come and see it. It was the Mass Cultural Facilities Fund. It was $125,000. It was a competitive grant, and we go after grants very aggressively, and we will do so again this year. But in terms of what's coming up, let's see. Our budget-wise, we really are pretty much in par with FY19, except for typically we do just a 1% cost of increase in our salaries. At this point, the minimum wage we see is going up, so our high school pages, we've already brought them up to the minimum wage. And we're future-proofing it a bit, so we're ready for any increase over there. We did produce a 5-year plan that's going to be up on our website after 1 year of focus groups and meetings. And as part of that, we actually did a long overdue compensation and classification study because I got the shock of my life last year, having lost 3 very professional librarians, which we hadn't for a while. I think we're also getting very attractive, so we're being poached very actively. So anyhow, we did do that. So we're going to have to discuss some internal and external equity positions for at least 4 of them, but we'll grade it over the next 5 years. So it's not a major shock. But otherwise, no increase in retirement, materials on par. We just have a limited footprint, so our materials are pretty much the same. Programs are managing to do it, a lot with a little, because Easton is so generous with its skills. And utilities, we actually hopefully have a little reduction thanks to DPW. We might save a little on trash, and let's see. Our heating system, if you look behind the library, you'll see something that looks like something out of Star Wars. Actually, it looks like the Daleks from Doctor Who, Doctor Who fans. But that's a cover for our heating system so that the snow does not go in. The snow used to go in at some point. It used to congeal the system, and we had to pay megabucks to get it repaired pretty much every year. So I'm hoping for a reduction in maintenance costs on that.
Mother Nature keeps it.
Oh, yes, we do the snow dance so that we won't have snow anymore. So that,
shouldn't have said it.
And of course, we'd expect a little increase in Queesit Garden. That garden is a magical place. It's just getting used all the time. A lot of wear and tear, so a little increase there. But as Jim said, it's pretty much on par. And a lot of excitement. So our budget is, as you said, it's the same, but lots of excitement. And since I have you as a captive audience, I can't resist. Let's see, where do I have it? This month in April, coming up, please put this on your calendars. Has anyone been for this fly fishing session? This is Randy Spencer. He's a master guide from Maine. He's coming in April, and he'll give a series. He'll give 3 series for all those fly fishers out there. Even if you don't do fly fishing, it's a thing of beauty to watch him. He's something like Garrison Keillor. He talks, he pulls out the guitar, he sings, he's just a grand person. He's going to do fly tying. That's coming up April 16th, and then April 17th, he's going to talk, he's written 2 books that have won awards. And then finally, my favorite is this, April 20th on a Saturday, he actually shows you the technique of fly fishing. And this time it's stay casting.
Stay casting.
For those of you who are fishermen. All I know is it's a lot of fun, and you catch fish at the end and get to eat fresh fish, hey. And we also have an international bestseller, Ellen Marie Wiseman. I did try to get Abdul one day. He's still on our list. But Ellen Marie Wiseman is coming. She wrote a book called The Life She Was Given. It's Depression era. It's about selling a kid to the circus. It's got a lot of powerful things. So do keep April 24th. And finally, did anyone see us in Chronicle? If you blinked, you would have missed us. But you did see us. Thank you. So somebody from Chronicle, Ted Reinstein, is coming to talk about his book, New England's General Stores. That's coming up in May. And April is Autism Month. So April 18th, we have a professional who's had personal experience also, who's going to talk about autism. I loved her sentence where she said, 1 in 59 children are on the autism spectrum. So it's about time that all of us need to be on the awareness spectrum. So that on your calendar. Are there any questions for us?
Uma, thank you very much. Jim, thank you very much.
Yeah, Uma, thank you. You
It's always a pleasure.
Yeah, energy and enthusiasm every time. And thank you so much for taking a little and making it a lot.
It's a great place to be in. So thank you. Should I collect my gizmos? You want to keep that?
No, that's okay. We don't want to get overwhelmed.
I also want you volunteer hours.
Okay.
Any chances more water's around?
Next up is,
if you want to take 2 minutes, there's water over there. It's up to.
okay, let's go. Planning and Economic Development. Stephanie, you're up.
Good evening, and thank you for having me here tonight. I don't have a presentation, and I don't have any stories except to say that while we don't provide critical services like the police department, and the DPW, and the fire department, our department does help the town plan for and realize its vision, so that when opportunities arise, like grant funding, private investment, and capital investments that the town is making in infrastructure such as sewer, that the town can realize that vision. That being said, our budget for next year is level funded. The only increases are in the salaries that are required by contractual obligations.
Pretty simple. Does anybody have any questions for Stephanie?
I do just want to note and credit that although it's not a life-saving function, your department does support significant grant activities. I think your narrative on page 30 identifies over 450,000 of grants received this year to support important planning initiatives. Your department is also supporting the DIF process that we're working on, the district improvement financing. That's been a major planning initiative with dozens, if not probably hundreds of staff hours between my office and your office and shared departments working with the community. So certainly, we're not running out an ambulance, but important work nonetheless.
I agree, not saving lives directly, but certainly doing a lot of the effort we need to develop some economic growth vehicles. I mean, it's part of the biggest project right now, the sewer projects that we have, and that's critical to some of the new growth that we have projected on the horizon. So it might not be the ambulance itself, but you're certainly helping to make sure we have the ambulance.
And we couldn't do it without the support of other agencies like the DPW and
Stephanie, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Chief, you all set?
Chief, did you bring us toys to play with?
He'll take you out to the police car later. Stick in the back and turn the lights on.
I have room for 6.
There you go. Hang your head out the window, make sense.
Good evening, everybody. Gary Sullivan, the police chief. I'm here to present the police and public safety dispatch budgets for 2020. If I could first start with the police budget. I do want to point out that back in December, I submitted a preliminary budget for police and dispatch, and I included or requested, I should say, a new police officer. We currently have 37 police officers, including myself, so this would have been a 38th position. So I'd like to bring you back, if I could, just a little bit to give you some idea, because I know there are a lot of new faces to the board and the finance committee. When I first took over as chief, I first presented a budget in 2016, and I presented a plan at that time to add 3 new police officer positions. So at that time, we had 35. So I was asking for 3 additional to bring us up to 38. And I outlined a plan of what I intended to do with those 3 new positions. And I also discussed the personnel comparison that I had done at that time. It's a little bit old at this point, but I looked at 16 communities that were similar to Easton in size, population, and also close geographically. And the purpose of the comparison was to determine the average number of police officers per 1,000 residents in those communities. So what I found was that Easton at the time, we had 35 police officers. So at that time, we were at a rate of 1.51 per 1,000 residents. The average number of all those communities, including Easton, was 1.94. So significant difference. We were tied at the bottom of that pack with the town of Bridgewater, and the town of Mansfield was a close tie as well. So since that time, we're very fortunate to add 2 new positions, so we're currently up to 37 police officers, including myself, which brings us to the average of 1.6 per 1,000 residents. So as you can see, we're still very, very low. We are still at the bottom. If we were to meet the average of all these communities, we would have 43 police officers in this community. So we fall short a little bit. I would never ask, that I'm not trying to, even be in the middle of the pack or exceed the middle of the pack. I'm simply looking to do what we can so that we can do more to provide better services to our community. And I think we could do that with more police officers. And with that said, again, going back to my original budget submission, the 38th officer, my plan was to assign a second full-time school resource officer. We currently have one. For those who may not know, we currently have one full-time resource officer who splits his time between Easton Public Schools and the Southeastern Regional Vocational Technical High School. It's a tall task for one officer. Gets pulled in a lot of different directions. The limited feedback that I've had thus far, it's worked very well. It's not ideal. I'd love to be able to provide a second one so that we could, that's something that we had a few years back. I'd like to bring that back if we could. But the reality of it is, looking at the overall budget, to kind of get to my point here, I did submit a revised budget just a couple of weeks ago, and that budget included the elimination of my request for the 38th police officer for this time around. Now, that's not to say that the school resource officer program is not important to me because of this, but I'm also a realist. I understand that there's a significant revenue deficit that the town is facing. I think that the responsible thing for me as chief in managing and administering this budget is to look at where we may need to sacrifice moving forward for at least this fiscal year, and hopefully come back to you next year with another proposal, and hopefully at some point we'll meet that goal. But for now, you'll see as we go over the budget that since that position was eliminated from my proposed budget, that the overall budget will be reduced by approximately $64,000.
Chief, I'm gonna just jump in for a second and
Sure
say
thing.
that, I know how important it is to you, and speaking to other law enforcement professionals, having a full-time resource officer at Southeastern Regional, and the benefits that you see of not pulling this person back and forth between Easton schools and that school district, are the relationships that that officer builds within that school. And it's very important so that these law enforcement professionals aren't showing up and putting out fires every time they show up. So they're building the trust of the students, of the staff, and they're also able to de-escalate situations and kind of maintain just calm, serenity amongst the student body and the staff. So it's very important. And it is tough when we're asking these officers to come and go and be pulled in different directions instead of, really helping, I think, the community, especially our most important population, the young people in our community who are our future professionals. So I know it means a lot to you, and thank you.
Thank you, appreciate that. So does anybody have any questions that as it relates to the elimination of the 38th position or the school resource officer program in general? All right, so we'll get right into the budget. And so if we could, line by line, I do not have the budget narrative books that you have, so I hope everybody has a revised version.
I believe, Chief, the budget we're working on for the Easton Police, bottom line is a 1.47% increase. Is that what you have?
That's correct, yes.
So everyone gets the updated one. Sorry to spoil.
It took the wind right out of my sails. So on the first section, the payroll section of the police budget, just simply at the top, starting with the department head, assistant department head, administrative salaries. Those are all new non-union positions. Almost every other item or account listed in the payroll section is one of the two police unions that we have. There's also the animal control officer who is part of a union as well. So a lot of what you're going to see here for projections, please keep in mind that the town and the two police unions are still in negotiations, so we are looking at projections. But a lot of that is due to collective bargaining agreements. Examples being career incentive, overtime, well, not overtime so much, but night differentials, longevities, and things like that. But as you'll see, the public safety personnel, detectives, court officer, school resource officer, animal control, and so forth. That's all a result of collective bargaining.
Chief, in terms of staffing, I believe we have one officer that is on a federal program still.
Yes.
And any update on how that is proceeding, timetable? I believe there was even an opportunity for us to receive some of the seized funds, if there were any such as that. How is that program working out?
Sure. So his assignment began in December, this past December. So he hasn't been in there for very long. It's working very well. We're in constant communication. He reports directly to me. We are, for those who may not know, previously had discussed that the DEA provides reimbursement to the town for overtime costs up to $18,100. Anything beyond that is, on the town. So we're managing that weekly. We submit monthly reports for reimbursement to the DEA. We anticipate getting reimbursements for December and January sometime soon. As far as any of the seizures and those things, they are working in a couple of very big cases, the task force. The officer that we have assigned there is very eager. He's younger. He does a great job for us, and there's no doubt in my mind he's doing a great job for the task force. But some of those are difficult to project as far as what we would see in return. But that's simply based on the cases that they work. And keep in mind too that there are 8 municipal agencies that are assigned to this task force. So DEA would get 20% of any seizure, and the other 8 communities would each get 10%. And if there are other agencies that are bringing in the task force to do a case, they would also be a part of that as well. So that things get broken down, and But I'm anxious to see where that goes. They have some very interesting cases, some very large cases that we'll see in the, I imagine, in the media at some point, so.
Thank you for the update.
You're welcome. So the overall increase to the payroll subtotal for a projected increase for fiscal year 2020 is $56,692, and that would be at a 1.40% increase. On the expense side of the police budget, you'll see a couple, two reductions. There is one significant increase that I am requesting, and that's the building maintenance account. For several years, there has been $900 appropriated to that account. I don't think there's much we can do with $900 these days when it comes time to maintaining an aging building. I believe the addition was put on somewhere about 1992. So we've had some building maintenance concerns and issues, whether it be water leaks, the roof, some mold mitigation and things like that. So we are taking on, I think I should have prefaced this, but we are taking on some additional expenses, some fixed costs that we had not taken on in previous fiscal years. Some of the fixed costs include waste management, pest control, and the generator costs and things like that. But there are also some unanticipated costs that I have concerns about. And I had mentioned the mold issue that we had, and thankfully, the Department of Public Works and their staff did most of the work, pretty much all of the work to mitigate that. But we also brought in a company to come in to do some air quality testing to ensure that, our staff is not negatively affected by, any of the molds. So that came out in negative, so it was a positive for us, so to speak. But those things cost money. As I said, it's an aging building. This isn't my best estimate of what I think we will need for the fiscal year. But the unanticipated costs, we just don't know what they'll be. So
I think we'd agree too. This falls in line with both the fire department, Health and Community Services now taking on more of that line item from the DPW, and so that's where these requests are coming from. It falls right in line.
I think it also echoes the fact that we have aging assets that we've heard regularly through our presentations that continue to be considered.
Right. We should expect those costs to continue to go up.
Any questions about the expense side? The public safety dispatch budget should be
quick. I think, again, the town is currently in negotiations with the dispatch union. So we have some projected salary increases there. But the one account that you'll see that my request has increased significantly by $20,000 is the overtime account. And just quickly, I think everyone is aware that in approximately 18 months, the town of Easton is joining the Regional Emergency Communications Center in Foxborough with the communities of Norton, Mansfield, and Foxborough. So, there are approximately 40 dispatchers right now in those 4 communities, and we're expected to take on approximately 25 to 30 employees at this rec emergency center. So there will be some dispatchers that will ultimately likely not have jobs. So as you can imagine, as an employee, as a dispatcher, an employee, wondering if you're going to have a job in 18 months from now. So there's a lot of concern. We have people leaving. We have people seeking other jobs that have not left yet. We lost 2 people. They have since come back, realizing that it's a good job and good benefits. But there's been a lot of overtime, a lot of voluntary, but a lot of involuntary overtime. People are getting forced to work on their days off. We're constantly hiring. We're constantly training. Until we plug those holes, there's just the overtime amount has just increased drastically, and we just can't keep up with it. We do our best, but the hiring process takes some time, and the last thing that we want to do is have somebody who's not yet qualified or ready to be dispatching fire and police assets. So Unfortunately, as you probably can see from at least the printout that I have for today, we are just over $20,000 in the red for this fiscal year, and we still have 25% of the year remaining. So it is a concern for me. We're doing everything that we can to manage it, but I think the reality is I would anticipate that overtime will continue to increase in the next fiscal year, unfortunately. You know, in years past, we do apply for grants every year from the state 911 department. We get approximately $50,000 for support and incentive, and we get approximately $11,000 for training, which we utilize 100%. In years past, we were able to utilize a support and incentive grant to help with this type of issue. This year, it's a little bit different, where we're moving in the direction of the Regional Emergency Communications Center. There are assessments, and we're having to funnel that money towards our share of the assessment. I don't want to misspeak, Connor, is that?
Yeah, a portion of that support and incentive grant, yes. So as a member community of SEMREC, Easton and Norton are going to be part of a second phase where we have an executive director on board already, a deputy director, myself, the 3 other town administrators or managers of Norton, Mansfield, and Foxborough serve as the board of directors to SEMREC, and we've been working with the chiefs, police and fire chiefs of all 4 communities for 2+. The chiefs have been working on it for years and years. We've been working as a cohesive team for 2 years since the IMA was executed to basically stand up a 25 to 30 person public safety operation from a piece of paper. And we're looking at the first phase of that starting in July for Mansfield and Foxborough. So the assessments right now are proportional to those communities. Easton has a small portion of that related to the ongoing cost of SEMREC that is paid for with the support and incentive grant. That's grant money from the state that comes from surcharges we all see on our cell phone bills. So we are looking probably 18 months from now. We don't have an exact date. They're doing a partial stand-up of that regional operationalization this July for those 2 communities. While they're doing that in Foxborough, we've procured a site, and we are going through the construction project to build our new dispatch center. Once that's complete, possibly 18 months from now, we'll move everyone to that location. We'll no longer have municipal dispatch in any of those 4 communities. So that, yes.
That's a big deal.
Yeah, it is a major project that we expect to. One of the major benefits of this, the state of Massachusetts, governments have a variety of ways of influencing behavior. One of the most powerful ones is money. That includes with intergovernmental behavior influence as well. And so the state of Massachusetts is looking to encourage municipalities to not have these individual, frankly, kind of parochial, what are called PSAP, public safety dispatch points. The farther out west you go in the United States, you have states that are 4 times the size of Massachusetts that have 3 or 4.
California, I believe, is one.
California has how many?
I believe it's around 4.
4 dispatch centers for California. We have 300 and something. That's because we're in New England. We have town meeting. We have a lot of local control. There's a lot of kind of democratic benefit to that, but you do not get economies of scale that way. So the state is trying to incentivize municipalities to regionalize. Regionalizing is going to become increasingly necessary. We talk about all these major revenue challenges we have, and we're talking about departments where we're making decisions on whether or not, we know the fire chief needs administrative support. We may not be able to do that, and that's not a reflect. We know that an SRO program would be good. We are likely not going to be able to do that, and that's not because we don't want to. It's because the revenue is simply not there. And so regionalizing is one way that we're trying to control for those cost growths. And what we're seeing for the first phase of stand-up from Mansfield and Foxborough, I believe, in total, their assessments are $550.
I'm not sure.
Somewhere in that area, $550,000. You look at Easton proportionally, our dispatch budget for next year is $650. So one of the benefits beyond the state trying to influence you to do this by increasing the support and incentive grant, so the percentage of that support and incentive grant you get grows if you join a regional PSAP. So we will get more of that money to support these operations. And additionally, we'll see, if things keep moving in the direction they are, improved service with better technology, with dedicated professional management. The chief is an incredible professional. However, we do not have a dispatch manager. And the chief has many, many officers to worry about as well. So in addition to all of those benefits of moving to a regional rec, it actually costs less money. So we're working towards that right now.
Quick question for you, sorry. And I get up at 4:30 in the morning, so you might have even already said it, and I apologize, I just think I missed over it. Are there open positions you said you just can't fill, and that's why the overtime costs are so high, or are you looking, I know you don't have,
Yeah,
but people are trying to leave.
We've had plenty
and
of
things,
interest, honestly.
Yeah.
It's just bringing them in for interviews, doing background checks and physical, pre-employment physicals and things like that. And then there's an 8-week training program. It's in collective bargaining agreement. We do that. We send them out for 911 training, because to be a certified telecommunicator or dispatcher,
Right.
you need to be certified through the 911 department,
Sure.
as well as emergency medical dispatching and those types of certifications. So it takes us some time to get there. It's not a problem with, it's not an issue of providing them the training and having that money available to do it. It's more the time that it takes to get there, and the amount of people that leave at one time, and having to shift people around and fill, there is a 2 dispatcher minimum, 24 hours a day.
Right.
Nobody works by themselves.
Yeah.
So filling those holes, it worked out voluntarily, pretty well at the beginning. Then it reached a point where I think we had 5 openings. We have 12 total dispatchers, and we had 5 openings at one point. It was just people constantly working.
What do you have now? How many openings?
We just, our 12th hire just started last night at midnight.
Oh.
She worked with us for a couple of years. She left, went up to New Hampshire. Wasn't for her, and she came back. And she's a terrific dispatcher, so we're glad to have her back.
Mhm.
So we're up to full speed for now.
Okay.
We do anticipate someone leaving likely soon.
But this is a challenge you see that with police and fire in general. Police and fire is exacerbated more due to civil service, but just the lag time between, even if you have an interested candidate, of onboarding them, getting them trained, and getting them on a piece of equipment. So there's a lot of undulation.
Thank you, sorry.
You're welcome. So overall, the projected increase for the public safety dispatch budget is $32,054. That's 5.24% increase. In between the police and public safety dispatch total, the increase is anticipated at 1.93%. So I think that, does anybody have any questions for either of the budget's concerns?
Chief, I just want to commend you, just same with all the departments and the schools who've come before us the past 2 nights, particularly citing the disparity in what your staffing levels are and what your needs are. You do an incredible job, so thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Chief. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief.
Have a good night.
Good evening.
Hello?
The treasurer collector's budget is on page 19.
Thanks.
As glamorous as it is. There's not too much to say about my budget. The operational part of it is level funded with a 0% increase. There's some slight increases in the salaries. And the only thing of note is that we have the salaries by the end of next year might be a little bit different. We had, in our department of 5 people, we had 1 person retire. And that position was almost immediately filled by a lateral transfer from within the department. But now we still have another position that needs to be filled, so we're advertising for it. So the final numbers might come out a little bit different next year, but I don't want to change them right now because I don't know what's going to happen.
Just to clarify, those are just filling vacancies, not adding staff.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you.
Yep. And that's really it for treasury collection. Does anybody have any questions about that? The other thing on my line tonight is debt service but I'm gonna ask the finance director to help me with that, because she's much more, I don't wanna waste too much time muddling around with it.
Good evening.
Hey, Wendy.
Hello.
Wendy Nightingale, Finance Director. So in your packets, the debt service, the maturing debt and interest budget, that's on page 81, or begins on page 80 with the narrative. In terms of significant budget changes, fiscal 2020 is gonna be a peak year for the debt service. We have the full impact of the ESCO debt that's coming online, and also we have to make some pay downs on some of the sewer debt that we have. Right now, we have notes outstanding on that, but in terms of them being outstanding, they've been outstanding for 2 years. So once notes are outstanding for 2 years, you have to start making principal pay downs. So we will be doing that, and also we have to make these payments now before the betterments will start to be assessed. So once the betterments are assessed, there'll be some free up of funds to cover that, but fiscal 2020 is gonna be a peak year. In your packet, there's basically 3 categories. You've got non-exempt school debt, non-exempt municipal debt, and then you've got exempt school debt. So that makes up your total. In terms of the debt that's outstanding, at the end of fiscal 18, we had about 36 million in debt outstanding in total, long-term debt for bonds. We then issued, at the beginning of this fiscal year, we issued about 2.8 million. So our debt outstanding right now is it's just under 39 million. And we also do have bands outstanding, that's short-term debt, of about 8.8 million. Much of that is related to the sewer projects. Of that debt that's outstanding, it's not all paid by the general fund. So there are some other categories that are covered by the Water Enterprise Fund, and the Community Preservation Fund also is paying some of that debt. So out of that total, about 25 million is covered by the general fund, and of that, about 12 million is for the exempt debt for the school project. For the, what's left right now for exempt debt is the high school, middle school renovation project. And that debt will reach its final payoff in fiscal 2027. But probably the biggest peak is gonna be 2026. We borrowed for that project in several increments, so there's basically 3 debt issues that are outstanding on that project. And 2 of the larger ones will be completed in 2026, and then there'll be 1 small one in 2027 for 244,000. So that debt right now for 2020 it's just under $1.9 million. So it's a significant portion of the debt budget.
Wendy, so to tie it into the long-term planning that the schools are doing on the school planning committee, so there's basically an opportunity a few years out, it's not next year, but not that far in the sense of how long these projects are, that the exempt debt associated with the last MSBA project will fall off the ledger. So right now, we're looking at about 1.9 million, and that's exempt, so that's in the tax levy that's raised from that project. Will
Right.
come off the books and decrease the levy by that
Yes.
amount.
Yes.
So there's an opportunity there for, if the town does move forward with the MSBA project for center school, that although if there was a consolidated school, that would be a large project. It would be a very cost-effective project, but it would be an expensive project, that by 2026, there would be a net effect where there wouldn't be as large of an impact on the current tax levy and tax bill.
Correct.
Is that fair? Okay.
Make sense, right? So the taxpayer in 2027, in theory, will have less at the end, the conclusion of that, if this debt that's there currently rolls off.
That's right.
And in theory, if we get this new project, it would replace that, don't know to what degree, to a certain degree, at some point in the near future, if
Right.
that project goes forward.
And I would imagine too, that by the time the debt service for that project would come online, that project is completed, and we start actually paying down on the principal and interest, there's not gonna be that much of a time lag between when that happens and we're sort of doubling up for a couple of years before this debt comes off.
So, one thing I want to note, because we are still more than $1 million out, and we do have a bubble year on debt payment, it is very likely that we're going to consider, so looking ahead to '21, we expect that of this $466,000 increase, that about $250,000 of that will be not recurring next year. So we are considering looking at, we have a variety of stabilization funds in town. We have general stabilization for operations, which we try to not use barring some sort of emergency. We also have capital stabilization funds, and one of the purposes of having that money set in a capital stabilization fund is to soften out sometimes when you have a peak year like this, to take some pressure off of the deficit on the operating departments of the towns and the schools. So that is something that Wendy and I are looking at. We'll be revising, as we always do at this point in the budget. We'll be doing at least one more budget revision memo, probably two at least, until we reach a balanced budget. That is one of the things that we are looking at, because that is a one-time bubble that will be coming off next year. So I just wanted to be transparent about that.
Right, and there is $242,000 of principal for debt that's outstanding that's gonna be paid off.
Right.
In that year, and that will free up some room.
Are there any questions for Linda or Wendy? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think,
Thank you.
Wendy, are you staying on to,
Town
Sure.
accountant.
Yes.
You are next.
Page one, sorry.
13.
Thanks.
So town accountant's budget is pretty bare bones. It's, mostly staff and a small amount of expenses, mostly related to training. The training for my department primarily consists of conferences that I would go to, particularly to maintain my certificate as a CPA. I need to get 80 hours every 2 years. I can do that reasonably by going to conferences that are put on by like my state association. Pretty affordable. There's one that I go to in March. It's an annual school. That's a very important conference. There's a certification process that accountants take. There's an exam. I've taken it. I'm certified. But I also bring my assistant to that. She's gotten a lot out of that, and she has also gotten her certification. So that's a conference. Then there's another one in June and in the fall. And also, I am pursuing certification for the Public Purchasing Officials Program.
Is that certification, is that a maintenance certification involved with that? That you take the test, you get certified, and there's a maintenance certification, or is it just the hours? Okay.
You have to meet certain, kind of like with the CPA, but not as many hours to maintain your certification.
Yeah, I believe you need to go back once every 3 years, I think. I think I have to go.
Yeah, I'm not sure
In
what the
Boston, it's
requirements
3
are.
8-hour
They-
days of procurement law. It's thrilling.
Sounds super exciting.
Record that and bring that, we'll do a second. No?
Stop talking.
Fortunately, they do offer classes to help you maintain that, so. So overall. Okay, so it's a 2.52% increase, mostly due to, the payroll end of it, and then a small increase in, training, $300, and, some of the other categories like dues and memberships, to just more accurately reflect, prior year spending.
Do we have any questions or comments for Wendy? Seeing none, thank you very much, Wendy.
Thank you, Wendy.
Thank you.
Yes, Wendy.
Good luck on the public purchasing.
Connor, you're up.
Sure, thank you. Board of Selectmen Town Administrator's budget. So the Board of Selectmen and Town Administrator, which is effectively represented by this table, minus a couple of members, we constitute the chief executive office of the town. All town departments, not including school, report to and are responsible to my office. We're primarily responsible for the town's financial management and the coordination of all daily governmental service delivery. We negotiate all labor contracts for the town's 8 labor unions, as well as other negotiation matters for the selectmen, including licenses with Comcast and Verizon. We deal with the procurement of goods and services. That's why we go to Boston to those fun seminars to ensure that we are complying with state law on all those items. We handle licensing for the selectmen, for restaurants, car dealers, things of that nature. We have the sole human resources staff, 1 person for the town, which manages the town's insurance policies and risk management policies. And we also deal with relations with other level of government. Board of Selectmen, same 5 people, serve as the Board of Selectmen, the Rent Control Board, the Water Commissioners, and the Sewer Commissioners. It's actually a 100% increase in their responsibilities from 10 years ago when we had no sewer and we didn't have a Rent Control Board. I serve on a variety of boards and committees myself. I'm on the Budget Subcommittee. I am staff support to the Selectmen, participate with the School Planning Committee, and try to make it to as many other meetings as I can. I'm also a member of the Board of Directors for SEMREC with the other town administrators to stand up that dispatch operation. So a couple notable successes, I think, the past year. Fiscal 19 budget, part of my responsibility as a chief financial officer for the town is adhering to the financial policies of the town established by the selectmen. Fiscal year 19 was the first budget to fully implement those policies, particularly as it pertains to our reserve fund use. That's not a particularly sexy topic, but it's a really important aspect to our financial management to try to make sure that we're reducing our reliance on one-time money for recurring operations, which is incredibly difficult, as you can all imagine, hearing the significant needs of all of our departments to simultaneously try to support or mitigate reductions in departmental requests while simultaneously reducing our reliance on reserves. We've cut almost $1 million of reserve spending since fiscal 16. That's $1 million of revenue. It's a good thing from a fiscal management standpoint, but that's $1 million fewer between the town and schools and all of our fixed costs that we have for allocation. We manage health insurance in part for the town. We decided to stay in the GIC a couple years back. That ties into one of the last items we'll talk about tonight, which is employee benefits and insurance. So the town is a member of GIC, which is a state consortium insurance provider for, I believe, 200,000 municipal and state employees. The rates for that have outperformed national market trends, which has been beneficial for the town. So going from 18 to 19, we saw employee health insurance on the aggregate increase by 1.01%. Going into 19 to 20, we're looking at 1.28%. So for as significant the challenges that we're facing with the remaining $1 million deficit, it would be far worse if our insurance plan was performing closer to national averages or plans that we had before we joined the GIC. In addition to those benefits, my office offered a health insurance opt-out and incentive plan last year. So the GIC has many, many, many different plans people can choose from. And we are not looking to compel any employee to change their benefits, but we wanted people to take a second look at some of the more cost-effective plans. So we offered effectively a bonus incentive plan where if you switched from one of the costlier premium plans to a cheaper one, the town would pay you a bonus that was a portion of the savings, and then the town would keep part of that savings. And so we actually saved $100,000 by doing that this year. So that's quite good. And we also manage loss control. The human resources coordinator in my office is, again, the one human resources staff we have. She's the chair of the executive loss control committee. They work with our municipal property casualty and liability insurance provider, Maya, to try and make sure that we're following best practices with risk management, things of that nature. And we get premium credits to reduce our insurance costs that we need to pay to insure the town. Most recently, those credits were over $50,000 for 1 year. So those are some notable achievements in this office. We have 4 full-time staff currently, not asking for additional, although I certainly think that there could be benefits of having additional positions like a citizen business advocate for town hall. I fully understand we are not in a revenue place where that's even worth formally submitting. And just as a point of comparison, we do have those 4 full-time staff to deal with the responsibilities that we have. And back when we had the audit in 2016, it showed that our comparable communities had between 4.5 to 6 people to perform the duties that we are. So we run lean, just like all the other departments that you hear before you. And our budget for 2020 is a level service budget. On the payroll subtotal, there's actually one typo. We adjusted overtime upward last year from 1 to 3,000 based on the increased volume of board meetings. The person who takes minutes is hourly. And it looks like we accidentally carried the prior 1,000, so we need to add 2,000 there. Other than that, everything that is in there is contractual, including the same dollar amount minus my salary. We moved the auto stipend from my salary line item to a stipend line item, but it's the same.
What is that?
It's part of my contract, but instead, I'm not eligible for reimbursement for driving anywhere. Instead, I get a flat stipend.
Oh. And that was previously elsewhere?
It was just shown in my salary, rather than separate. And then expenses are level funded. So the aggregate here is a 2.12% increase. When we fix that typo on the overtime, it's probably closer to a 2.6%. Be happy to answer any questions about any of the stuff we do.
Straightforward for me. Thank you, Connor.
Thank you.
Now we're going to Finance Committee and Reserve Fund.
Wendy, are you gonna pick that up?
So for the Finance Committee, we level funded the amount from last year, was $2,000. $1,700 for clerical salaries for the recording secretary, $300 for committee expense, which is typically the dues that is paid to the Association of Town Finance Committees, the annual dues. And for the reserve fund, again, that was level funded. We have been fortunate, this year that we have not had to use that. It's already March, but there is either going to be a request coming. We do have budgets that will need to be supplemented. If we can't make it to town meeting, we'll be coming to the Finance Committee to ask for additional funds. I know some departments that are, running a little close, particularly town council. This was a year when, and actually we're gonna be getting into that budget next, but You know, we had a lot of town council fees just because of contract negotiations, so it was definitely a year where the expenses were higher. So that department will need some kind of supplement, whether it's through town meeting or the reserve fund. The other thing is that we're keeping an eye on is the dispatch budget, that overtime cost.
I'd like to point out how incredibly efficient finance committee is.
Yes.
The amount of hours we put in, it's good.
We owe you $2,000. You guys owe $2,000.
Thanks for.
Any other questions or accolades?
Yes.
Finance committee.
Several more accolades.
When we get the
Parthenian
Wendy, you gonna
Right.
slide right into town council, or is that, or
That'd be
Connor, you
I
gonna do that?
can unless,
Sure, I can speak to that, I'm just gonna pull it up. So town council's page 21. We were looking at a increase of 2.9% over prior year, just adjusting labor council up from 30 to 35,000. More in tracking with what we're seeing, as Wendy had alluded to, this year is an extraordinarily negotiation-heavy year. We've been, the negotiations started at various times, but in one way or another, I've been working on negotiating 8 labor contracts since January of 2018. What year are we in? 19, yeah, 18. As well as negotiating successor 5- and 10-year licenses for Comcast and Verizon. So it's just a negotiation-heavy year, which is reflected in Wendy's comment that we may need a small supplement from the Finance Committee Reserve Fund. So looking at a $5,000 increase overall. The largest one of those items, town council, is they're on a flat retainer, barring any kind of particularly innovative litigated matters. So that's relatively straightforward to budget for. So overall, you're looking at a $5,000 increase of 2.94%.
Any questions for Connor? Debt service, employee benefits and insurance and other expenses?
Sure, we actually put the debt service on the agenda twice, so we're
Okay.
actually just gonna go straight into benefits and insurance. Wendy, if you wanna pick that up, I think that's on page 82 of your packet.
so employee benefits and insurance, this is definitely, you know, one of our biggest areas in the budget. There's basically several key areas that make up the total in this budget, and you've got the employee health insurance, which is the largest, followed by the county retirement assessment. There was, you know, a big increase to the county retirement assessment. They are looking to be on track to fully fund their, you know, their pension obligation by 2028. So a good portion of this pension assessment is to meet that funded liability. That went up by 8%. That is net of the early pay discount, which actually is pretty good. It's $85,000, so we're able to save $85,000 by paying that pension assessment up front in the month of July versus 2 semi-annual installments. Health insurance, we've talked a lot about health insurance already and the savings that we've achieved through being in the GIC, and, you know, we were fortunate that the rates did not go up significantly this year. So that's really been a help for getting to our bottom line. The other area that has increased is just the general property liability insurance and the workers' comp insurance. These figures, our budgets have probably been a little bit low in the last few years, but our expenses have been, you know, more in line with the requested amounts. And that's because we always knew we had a little extra money in the budget to sort of absorb those costs, but now that we're getting to the point where we're running a lot leaner, we need to adequately reflect what our needs are gonna be in those line items.
And Wendy, correct me if I'm wrong,
And-
some of that is reflective of, these are insurances that are, there's audits, for lack of a better word, of regularly, I believe annually, and like some property that's based on evaluation of the actual property of the town. That was
Yes.
conducted recently, where they said
And-
your property is worth a little bit more than your policy, and you need to increase that.
That's correct. So periodically, they do a review of all the departmental buildings. They did a review of all the school buildings in particular. And that ended up increasing our premium about $48,000. We decided to implement it instead of doing it for the whole year, because they had done the assessment so close to January. We did it so that we implemented it a half year this fiscal year, but the full amount is in the budget for next year. And then there's also a reserve for increases, employee increases of $75,000, because we still have some contracts that are not final.
Right, there's two pieces there that are important. So last year, that budget amount was larger because we had collective bargaining underway. We didn't know exactly what that impact was, but obviously you wouldn't just plan nothing in the budget, so we put that money there. This year, so in addition to overwhelmingly on the town side, we have unionized employees. We have less than, I think, 20 or fewer non-union employees. And those employees are governed by the personnel bylaw. It's chapter, I think, 50, either 6 or 59 of the town code. And the personnel bylaw speaks to the obligations of the town and the Human Resources Board and my office as it pertains to those staff, including every 5 years conducting a classification and compensation survey and plan. The last time we did that was 2014 and 15. We have been working on that now. So we don't know the results of that yet. We expect a draft, I think, actually this week. And because that is underway, it's required by that bylaw, we did put a small amount of funding in that EE pay increase reserve line in the event that that study comes back recommending that there need to be any adjustments to those positions. Those are effectively positions like the finance director, the DPW director, the chiefs, the assistant town administrator, and staff that support those management functions. So again, sensitive to the significant budgetary challenges we have, any kind of decision on that front will be made looking at the deficit that needs to be closed still, which is sizable, but we wanted to program that in at this stage for now, rather than being reactive to it later.
Wendy, I apologize if you said it in your opening and I missed it, but do you believe the county retirement assessment will continue to increase at this rate, or is there a potential for it to get worse as it nears the 2028 maturity date?
I would say it's probably gonna increase at least by this rate, hopefully not more.
Well,
Yeah, but
so
2028 is not
huge.
that far off.
Right, and so that's a massive part of what, so we didn't necessarily say this, but so we can break our budgets into kind of different buckets, and we have the town operating budget, which is, police, fire, DPW, town hall, library contribution, and you see that go up, I think the request in the preliminary budget is very marginal. It's 2.9%. You have education, which has the school and also a regional school, that's 3.11. The schools, public schools are currently at 3.08. Things that are really challenging our ability to fund those operating budgets are fixed costs. Those are costs we don't have a tremendous amount of immediate control over in a given year, and that includes things like getting an 8% increase on a pension assessment, which is already a $4.2 million number. For size comparison, the entirety of the town hall, I think, is $2.4 million. So it's a sizable cost that we have to pay. Hopefully, the concept of fully funding is that once you get to that point, the employee contributions will self-fund moving forward into the future.
Correct.
And I believe this is basically playing catch-up because decades and decades and decades ago, members of county retirement systems, whatever actuarial did the analysis, made an assumption, I think, of 5 and sometimes 7% employee wage contributions. That has gone up at numerous times. Now I think it's 9% of an employee's wage plus 2% on anything over 30,000
Yes.
goes to the pension, which is probably a much more reasonable contribution for a fixed benefit pension. In the interim, we are playing catch up for some of those perhaps not as accurate calculations from many decades ago. So hopefully, we'll get to 2028. Those will be some good years. We have the debt exclusion for OA coming off, and hopefully the pension assessment dropping.
How much of this
Yeah.
4.6 million may potentially go away in 2028?
I believe it's around 2.5 million.
So I think that's very important. If we can get to
If we
2028,
make it.
in theory.
If we can get
9
there.
more years.
Well, I hate to say it, but in the
Something
last
is.
4, it's effectively cost us $1 million worth of our
Yeah.
effective operating spend, going from 3.5 million to 4.6 million. And, you know, honestly, the way I talk about it in my day job is that that's a fixed cost, that's a commodity.
Yeah.
That you
Yeah,
just,
can't move that up.
right, it's very difficult. And so, that's tough when you hear about a lot of the things that we had to go through not yesterday, maybe yesterday for you folks, but Monday and today about aging fleets, doing less with more, needing more staff to be as effective and as we can.
What combines with a variety of other things, you know, I
Right.
mentioned before, cutting reserve use by $1 million in a similar time window. There's $2 million, right? $1 million more of a fixed expense, $1 million less of revenue. We're going into 20 with the governor's budget proposing a net reduction in state aid of 200 grand. It's an extraordinarily challenging situation to be in. You know, we'll produce a balanced budget, we have to, but there will continue, we'll continue to have to work at it, and very likely we'll be looking to reductions in the operating budgets, in addition to revising our revenue assessments once Q3 closes, which is this week. So it's challenging.
Worth mentioning too, Tom and the others, about, you know, we're talking about having a fully funded pension, but yet we have a health insurance, right, that we are seeking to fund and have started to make contributions towards.
Good
But
point.
that still needs, you know, that's still an unfunded benefit that, you know, just having this go away doesn't mean that
Great point.
the money becomes available.
That's
So-
right.
Yep.
It's an excellent point, that we all, as budget managers, need to be cognizant of that. When you have a fixed cost fall off, you can't just instantly fill that with, even if it's justified with operating needs, you have to weigh that against other long-term liabilities, like OPEB liabilities, which are things that we're working on finding some other concepts to support too on the labor side. It's a very good point.
Okay, any other questions or comments on employee benefits? Other general government?
Oh, okay.
34.
Audit accounting fees.
So other general government is going up by, we're estimating 5.36%. The items that have increases, the first one is the audit fee. We put in 40,000 at the time. We weren't sure what the amount was gonna be. It's actually gonna decrease to 36,000, because that's the amount that's being proposed for the contract for the fiscal 19 audit. And the following year, it will go up a little more. They're proposing, a 3-year contract. The second year will also require an audit of the student activity funds, so that will increase the fee to $41,500, but that's in fiscal 2021. So that amount can be reduced. However, the next line, the Bristol County Agricultural School, we did recently get the assessment for that, and that's about $11,500, so that's $3,000, so it's practically a wash. The next line, town reports, we increased that to 5,000. We've spent, more than that this year. Included in that line is not just the printing of the annual town report, but also the amounts that we pay for ClearGov to have that information on our website. And then the other increase is really, it's just a shift. So it's an increase in expense committees, but that increase is basically coming from a reduction to the line for the municipal building committee. The municipal building committee, that was a line that was for the recording secretary for that committee. But we actually have several committees like the audit committee, or the capital planning committee, and the recording secretaries will come out of that line for just the expense committees versus municipal building. That's it for other general government. Just some other things that are in here. This is sort of a little catch-all for items that don't necessarily fit in other departmental budgets. So we have our dues to the Southeastern Regional Services Group. That has been $4,100 for practically as long as I can remember. That's a great deal because they do a lot of regional procurements for us, particularly for DPW. And they do our office supply procurement also, and paper. And then we just have some expenses for committees, for Veterans and Memorial Days, so the amounts that we pay for expenses related to the parade go in there. And then there's a line for the Cemetery Commission. And also the postage meter is in here as well. And there's no increase proposed for that at this time. So
Any
that's it.
questions? Thank you, Wendy.
All right.
Thank you, Wendy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy.
Public participation. Town administrators' notes.
Thank everyone for their significant time investment. Still a lot of work to do, we'll get through it.
Thank you, Connor. Selectmen notes.
Just echo what Connor said, I think it's very clear that all the department heads, Connor, the full team, the school department, school committee, finance committee, really, I think this is invaluable to helping us understand the state of the financial affairs of the town, how it might impact what we're able to provide in terms of town services, and the school and education. And it's just very clear that a lot of thought went into it, a lot of effort goes into it, a lot of tough decisions have to get made. So I appreciate everybody's time and effort.
Thank you, Tom. I think that's going to end it, so can we have a motion to close the meeting, the joint meeting?
I'll make a motion to adjourn. Second that.
Any comments? All in favor? Good job, folks. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.